These big, sweeping names. The direct payments, they're kind of like the little bone thrown to regular folks inside these much, much larger.
So are we getting another stimulus check? Come on, it's the question that's on everybody's mind, right? Especially if you're on a fixed income, arguing less about money, being able to connect on a human level again. This is powerful, powerful proof that financial stability is a cornerstone of our emotional and relational health.
So as we've seen through all the stories and all the data, this goes so much deeper than just economics. We've paid the bills, we've calmed the anxiety, but if we boil all of this down to its purest, simplest form, what is the true, fundamental power of this kind of assistance?
Let's just ask that question directly. After everything we've looked at, the relief, the ripple effect, the restored peace of mind, what is the single most important thing that a stimulus check really provides?
It's this. One word. Hope. In a world that can feel so overwhelming and isolating sometimes, hope is the fuel that keeps us all going. And that, more than anything else, is what this represents.
But what kind of hope are we talking about? Well, it's the hope that your current struggle isn't permanent. It's the belief in a better future, that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And maybe, most importantly, it's the hope that comes from feeling seen. It's a signal from the world that someone recognizes you're struggling, that your hardship matters, and that you haven't been completely left behind or forgotten. And that brings us to this final, crucial thought. If you're going through this, if you know what that weight of worry feels like, I just want you to remember this. You are not alone. Millions of people understand what you're feeling. Your worth is not defined by your bank balance. And that desire for dignity, for security, for a little peace of mind, that is a universal human need. This entire explainer has really just been about one thing, showing that a little help isn't just about the money. It's about validating our shared humanity. And that is a powerful message of hope for all of us.
Today, we're talking stimulus checks, but probably not in the way you're used to thinking about them. We usually see them as, a little bit of help, some financial relief. But what if that's just scratching the surface? Seriously, we're about to dive into what this money really is, and I promise you've never thought about it like this before. All right, so let's just start with a simple question to kind of shift our perspective. For just a second, try to forget everything you know or assume about this money, and just ask yourself, what if this thing, this direct deposit hitting your account, what if it wasn't just a check? What if it was something else entirely? Because, well, it is something else. It's a tool. It's an instrument that gives you real economic influence. And in this explainer, I'm going to show you exactly how that's not just some cool-sounding phrase. Nope, it's a real, measurable, economic fact. You're about to find out just how much power you're actually holding. Okay, let's get right into it. The very first superpower we need to talk about, it's a concept economists have known about for ages, but honestly, most of us have never heard of it. It's called the stimulus multiplier. And this is the secret sauce. It's how your check becomes way more than just the number printed on it. So yeah, this is the big idea right here, the multiplier effect. It's like this economic magic trick that happens the moment you spend your money. I mean, think about it, right? You go spend $1 at your local coffee shop. That dollar doesn't just disappear. The shop owner uses it to pay the barista. Then the barista uses it to buy groceries. The grocery store uses it to pay their stocker. And it just keeps going and going and going. Your $1 is out there working, moving, creating value long after you've spent it. And what's really wild is that economists can actually calculate this ripple effect. They use this surprisingly simple idea that has a super fancy name, the marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. Now, don't let that name scare you off. It's really just a simple question. For every new dollar you get, how much of it are you going to spend right away, and how much are you going to save? So when it comes to stimulus checks, the average MPC is around 0.35. What does that mean? It means for every dollar that comes in, people spend about 35 cents of it almost immediately. The rest might go to savings or paying down debt, and that's important too. But that 35 cents, that's the spark. That's what gets the whole economic fire going. Okay, so we've got the basic idea, and we've got the key number. Now let's put them together and see how this creates something huge. This is where it gets really cool. So let's take a real number, like a $1,400 stimulus check. Picture that as the very first domino you're about to tip over. Okay, so when you run the numbers, and the formula is basically built around that 35-cent spending habit we talked about, you get a multiplier of about 1.54. So you take your $1,400, you multiply it by 1.54, and what do you get? $2,156. Just let that sink in for a second. Your check's real impact on the economy isn't $1,400, it's over $2,000. You didn't just get help, you injected over $2,000 of economic energy into your community. And that brings us to your next superpower, speed. Because it turns out it's not just that you spend the money, it's how fast you spend it. That's what makes stimulus such an incredible kickstarter for the economy. So let's look at why your spending is the catalyst here. Yeah, economists have a term for this too. They call it spending velocity. And the best way to think about it is like a pond versus a river. Money just sitting in a savings account, that's a stagnant pond. It's not really doing much. But money that's being spent quickly, that's a powerful river. It's moving, it's circulating, it's creating energy everywhere it flows. And stimulus money, especially when it lands in the hands of people who really need it, that's one of the fastest flowing rivers there is. And this chart just lays it out perfectly. I mean, look at this. Data from the pandemic stimulus checks showed a super clear pattern. In just 10 days, folks in low-income households had spent almost half their check, 44.5%, on things they needed right away. Middle-income families? About a quarter. High-income households? Barely 10%. They just didn't need it for immediate stuff. And that's why targeting stimulus matters so much. You put the money in the hands of the people who will get it flowing the fastest. Let's trace the journey of, say, $100. You decide to take the family out to a local restaurant. Okay, step one. The owner takes that $100 and uses it to pay a server and buy some fresh produce from a local farmer. That's step two. Now, that server takes her pay and gets a haircut down the street, and the farmer buys some new tools at the local hardware store. Step three. See what's happening? All these other local businesses are getting a piece of the action. Your one decision to eat out created a whole wave of opportunity for tons of other people in your town. So here's the most important part. None of this is random. You are the one calling the shots. That means you can be strategic. You can choose to make your impact even bigger. This isn't just about spending money. It's about spending it with a purpose. Let's open up the playbook. All right, play number one. Check this out. Studies show that when you spend $1 at a big national chain store, about $1.20 of economic activity stays local. Okay, that's not bad. But get this, when you spend that exact same dollar at a locally owned shop, it creates about $1.80 in local activity. That is a 50% bigger impact. Why the difference? It's simple. Local owners live where you live. They use local banks, hire local people. They're part of the same ecosystem. So your choice of where to grab a coffee literally changes the financial outcome for your neighborhood. But what about bills? What if you have to pay down debt? A lot of people think that's like an economic black hole, that the money just disappears. But that's not true at all. It's actually a huge power move. Think about it. When you pay down a high-interest credit card, you are giving your future self a raise. Let's say you knock out a $1,000 debt that has 20% interest. Boom. You just saved yourself $200 a year. That's $200 that is now free to be spent year after year. It becomes part of your regular cash flow, feeding right back into that local economy. It's a multiplier that pays off for a long, long time. And you know, for those in a position to do so, there's an even more powerful long-term move, investing. And I'm not talking about the stock market. I'm talking about investing in you. Using some of that money for a new certification, that could boost your earnings for the rest of your life. Using it to start that side hustle you've been dreaming about, that creates a whole new income stream. Heck, even putting it into new energy-efficient windows for your house, that lowers your bills forever. These are the kinds of choices that build real, lasting economic power. Okay, let's talk about the final superpower. This is the one that most people completely miss, and it goes way beyond just your own bank account. This one has the power to lift up your whole community. This is so fascinating. We never really talk about this, but the simple feeling of relief that comes with a stimulus check, that's not just a feeling. It has actual, measurable economic value. Get this, studies show that severe financial stress can tank someone's productivity at work by as much as 20%. It also leads to higher healthcare costs for everybody, so when you reduce that stress, even for a little while, people can focus better, they're more productive, they make smarter decisions. This psychological multiplier helps create a healthier, more effective workforce, and that's a huge hidden win for the whole economy. So how do you actually use all this? You make a plan. You can literally time your moves to get the biggest bang for your buck. So phase one, the first month, focus on that high-speed spending. Cover your immediate needs, ideally at local spots, and attack that nasty high-interest debt. Phase two, the next couple of months, now you get strategic. You make a conscious effort to support local shops, and just as important, you tell other people about this stuff.
Then, phase 3, the long game, you take that extra cash flow you created by paying off debt and you use it for more local spending or those smart personal investments. It's a step-by-step plan to becoming an economic power player.
And that really brings us to the single most important takeaway here. Once you understand all this, the multiplier effect, spending velocity, the power of buying local, everything changes. You're not just some passive person getting a handout. No, you are an active, crucial part of a really sophisticated economic engine. The entire system relies on your choices, where you spend your money, when you spend it, what you buy, to create those positive ripples that benefit everyone. Your role is not passive, it is active. And that, right there, is your superpower.
You've probably wondered how government stimulus programs actually work, right? Well, today, we're pulling back the curtain and breaking down the entire system. We're giving you the insights you need to really understand it, and even navigate it. Think of this less as an explanation, and more as your personal playbook. Okay, so that sounds a little dramatic, I know, but it gets to the very heart of what we're talking about today. This isn't about some wild conspiracy theory. It's about understanding the predictable mechanics behind a really complex system, seeing the patterns, the timing, and the formulas that, honestly, most people never even notice.
And that right there, that's the goal. By the time we're done here, you're going to understand the why and the when behind stimulus checks. It's all about shifting you from just being a passive recipient to someone who is prepared, informed, and ready. So let's dive in. First things first, we've got to look backwards to see what's ahead. It turns out these big stimulus programs aren't just random acts of kindness from the government. Nope. Our analysis shows this remarkably predictable pattern that has played out during almost every major economic crisis in recent history. Understanding this cycle is your first real advantage.
This right here maps out the entire life cycle. It all kicks off with an economic trigger, a recession, a pandemic, something big. Then you get this weird denial phase, where officials might try to downplay it, but that always shifts to recognition, and that's followed by a frantic legislative sprint to pass a bill. Only then do we get to the distribution and, hopefully, the recovery. If you can figure out which phase we're in, you can start to anticipate what's coming months before anyone else.
And this is fascinating because it shows us that stimulus isn't just pure economics. It's got a ton to do with political timing. The data's pretty clear. When unemployment climbs over 6%, the chances of action just skyrocket. Same thing happens in an election year. It's a powerful tool on the campaign trail. So the real takeaway here, you should be watching the monthly job reports and the political calendar just as closely as the economists do. Those are the real tells.
Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk about the actual dollar amounts you hear on the news. $1,200, $600, $1,400. You might think they're just pulled out of a hat, right? Well, they're not. There's a real science behind them, a calculated effort to find that perfect economic sweet spot. Let's decode those magic numbers. So why does a number like $1,400 keep popping up like it did back in 2021? Well, it all comes down to tons of economic research that's identified this amount as basically the sweet spot. It's just enough money to actually change people's spending habits and give the economy a real boost, but it's designed to be just under the point where it might trigger massive runaway inflation. It's the maximum bang for the buck. Now, to really get why $1,400 works, you need to know about this one concept. It sounds fancy, marginal propensity to consume, or MPC, but I promise the idea is super simple. All it means is this: if I give you an extra dollar, how much of it will you immediately go out and spend? The answer to that question is probably the single most important factor for figuring out how effective a stimulus check is actually going to be.
And this chart breaks down what happens to that money. The research shows that people with very little in savings will spend about 45 cents of every new dollar, like right away. For the average person, it's closer to 35 cents. The rest, it usually gets saved or used to pay off some debt. This data is exactly why stimulus is often targeted. The government knows that getting money to the people who will spend it the fastest is the key to kickstarting the economy. Now let's talk about timing. What a lot of people don't realize is that a stimulus payment has a shelf life. It's kind of like a shot of adrenaline for the economy. For the first 3 months, you get the biggest positive impact. But after that, the benefits start to fade and the worries about inflation start to creep in. This 6-month window is absolutely critical. It explains why, sometimes, we see multiple rounds of stimulus spaced about half a year apart. They're trying to keep hitting that sweet spot before the downsides take over.
Okay, so we've covered the when and the how much. Now let's get to the part I'm sure you really care about. How do you get it? See, the IRS has a very clear, very methodical distribution hierarchy. And knowing where you are in this pecking order is the absolute key to getting your money as fast as humanly possible.
The order is simple and it's absolute. At the very top of the list, the VIPs of stimulus are people who have direct deposit information on file with the IRS. They can see that money in just a matter of days. Next up are federal beneficiaries, like folks on Social Security. And way at the back of the line, waiting weeks longer, are the people who get paper checks or debit cards. The takeaway here couldn't be clearer. Direct deposit is king.
Now, your eligibility isn't just a simple yes or no. It's based on your adjusted gross income, your AGI, from your last tax return. And as you can see, there are some pretty clear cliffs. If you're a single filer, you get the full amount up to $75,000. But for every dollar you earn over that, the payment starts to shrink until it just disappears. Knowing these numbers lets you strategize. For someone who's just a little bit over a threshold, a simple move like bumping up a retirement contribution could lower their AGI and suddenly make them eligible for the whole thing.
So, we've unpacked the patterns, we've decoded the numbers, and we've looked at the distribution system. Now let's get to the final and I think most important part, turning all of this knowledge into a real personal strategy that you can actually use to maximize your benefit and get ready for whatever's next. To build that strategy, let's start with just a single dollar. When the government sends you $1 of stimulus, its journey is just getting started. It actually sets off this incredible chain reaction throughout the economy, something economists call the multiplier effect. And thanks to that multiplier effect, your one little stimulus dollar actually creates about $1.54 in total economic activity. How? Well, you spend it at a local restaurant. The owner then uses that dollar to pay their supplier. The supplier then pays their employee. See? That single dollar gets spent over and over again. And the source material points out that you can make this even more powerful by consciously spending that money at local businesses, keeping it flowing right there in your own community. But, and this is a big but, it's so important to understand the trade-off here. Stimulus gives that immediate, often necessary relief, but it can also lead to inflation down the road, which we all saw happen after 2021. So the key takeaway for your personal strategy is that when you get a payment, it's probably pretty smart to also prepare for the possibility of higher prices on things like gas and groceries in the months that follow. So what can you do? Like right now? Here it is, a simple 3-step action plan. First, head over to irs.gov and just confirm they have your correct info. Second, if your bank account has changed or you've moved, update it. This is the single biggest thing that affects how quickly you get paid. And third, and this is a big one a lot of people miss, even if you have zero income to report and you don't owe any taxes, file a simple return. It gets you in the system, it puts you on the list, it makes sure you don't get overlooked. So, let's just bring it all home. This is your new advantage. You're no longer just sitting around waiting for the news to tell you what's happening. You can now anticipate when a stimulus might be coming just by watching those key triggers. You know the exact steps to take to get it faster than most people. You understand the logic behind how much you might get, and you know how to use it effectively to help yourself and your community. You have the whole picture now. So there you have it. We've just handed you the insider's playbook. You now have a deep understanding of the patterns, the numbers, the systems, and the strategies behind economic stimulus. And that knowledge, that's power. The only question left is, now that you can see what's coming, how are you going to use it?
Let's talk about the one thing that is on just about everybody's mind: stimulus checks. You know, is more help actually on the way? We've been digging through all the source material to get you some real answers about whether another check is coming, how much it could be, and maybe most importantly, what you can do about it right now. So let's just cut right to the chase. This is the big question, isn't it? Are we really getting more stimulus checks? Okay, here's how we're going to break this all down for you. First, we'll look at how likely more stimulus is. Then, the fun part, what a potential check could actually look like. We'll also get into why this whole thing is so complicated, inflation and all that. And we'll wrap up with what you can actually do to get prepared. First step is more stimulus coming. Let's get the honest, no-fluff answer. Look, the most honest answer is nobody knows for sure because nothing's been signed into law. But, and this is a big but, that definitely doesn't mean it's a no. There are absolutely reasons to be hopeful, and more importantly, there are some really key signs you can watch for that could signal help is on the way. So what exactly should we be looking for? Well, the sources point to 4 main signals. If you start seeing headlines about widespread layoffs, rising unemployment, or the stock market taking a big dip, those are all huge economic red flags. And the fourth one? It's political. You gotta listen to the language. When politicians start talking less about the deficit and more about helping people, that's usually when the talk starts turning into action. And this really gets to the heart of the issue, right? On one hand, you've got reasons for hope. It's an election year, and history shows us that politicians are way more likely to act when the economy looks weak. But then there's the caution side, the reality check. Right now, these are just proposals. No check has actually been approved. And if the economy bounces back on its own, all that pressure to send out more money could just evaporate. Okay, now for the part I know everyone is really waiting for. Let's talk about the money. If a check does come, how much could we be talking about, and who would actually get it? History actually gives us some really powerful clues here. If you look at the pattern, the payments have been growing over time. Back in 2008, it was around $600. By 2021, we were at $1,400 per person. So a pretty clear trend has been set, and that trend is up. So where does that trend lead? Well, based on the source material, a lot of experts think the next number could land somewhere between that last $1,400 mark and $2,000 per person. I mean, stop and think about that for a second. For a family of four, that could be an $8,000 check. That is absolutely life-changing money. And here's the really good news. These payments are almost always designed to help a broad range of people. We're talking about folks who work and pay taxes, retirees on Social Security, people who are unemployed, and of course, families with kids. You don't have to be living in poverty to qualify. Most middle-class households have been included in the past. The whole point is to help regular, everyday people. So this all leads to the big question. If people need help and there's a history of giving it, what's the holdup? Well, it really boils down to two huge complications: the fear of inflation and just a massive flood of misinformation out there. Okay, first, let's just make sure we're all on the same page with inflation. All it really means is that your dollar doesn't go as far as it used to. The prices for everything, gas, groceries, you name it, they go up, and your money just buys less. This is the number one reason opponents of more stimulus bring up. But was stimulus really the main villain? Well, the source material shows it's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. You had massive supply chain problems, soaring energy costs, and a lot of companies just hiking up their prices. So stimulus was a factor, for sure, but it wasn't the whole story. And this is the debate policymakers are having. How do you help people who are hurting without making prices go up even more? And then there's the other big problem: misinformation. I mean, come on, you've seen posts like this all over your social media feed, right? They're designed to prey on your hope, on your desperation. And let's be real, they are almost always fake. And a lot of times they're straight up dangerous scams. So how do you protect yourself from this stuff? It's pretty simple. Be skeptical. Real official announcements will come from official places, like irs.gov. It'll be on every major news network. If some random post promises you $5,000 a month, it's probably not real. And whatever you do, never, ever click on suspicious links. All this waiting and wondering, it can make you feel pretty powerless, but you're not. So let's shift gears. Let's talk about what you can actually do right now to put yourself in the best possible position. Here is a simple 4-step action plan. The first two are all about making it easy for the government to pay you. Go to the IRS website and make sure your address and bank info are up to date. And file your taxes, even if you have zero income and don't owe anything. Third, stay informed, but stick to reliable news sources. And finally, use your voice. Let your elected representatives know that you need help. It really does make a difference. Oh, and a super important side note here: if you think you might have missed out on that big payment from 2021, you might still be able to get it. It's called the Recovery Rebate Credit, and you claim it by filing a 2021 tax return. But you have got to act fast because that window to claim it is closing. Now, if a payment does get approved, having a plan for that money is everything. The sources suggest this priority list. Start with survival stuff: rent, food, keeping the lights on. Then immediately attack any high-interest debt: credit cards, payday loans, the stuff that's costing you money every single month. After that, build up some security, like a small emergency fund. Look, this isn't about being told what to do. It's just a smart strategy to turn that money into real, lasting stability. I really want to end with this thought because it's just so important to remember. If you're feeling that financial pressure, if you're worried about how you're going to make it to the end of the month, please know you are not alone in this. Millions and millions of your neighbors are going through the exact same thing, just hoping for a little bit of help. And that brings us to our last question, the one we want to leave you with.
We've talked about the signs, the politics, the numbers, the scams, and how to prepare. So now it gets personal. If that money comes through, what's your plan? Seriously, having an answer to that question is maybe the most powerful thing you can do. Today, we're going to dive into a fascinating new study that completely rethinks those stimulus checks a lot of us received a few years back. It asks a really simple but powerful question. Was there a much smarter way to handle that economic rescue? The answer? Well, it might just change how we think about this stuff forever. Let's get into it. Yeah, you remember it, right? Seeing that direct deposit hit your bank account during what was a really, really uncertain time. For a lot of folks, it was an absolute lifeline. For others, well, maybe it just went straight into savings. This new research suggests that by being a lot more deliberate about who gets the money, we could create a system that's not just more powerful, but a whole lot more efficient too. So to really understand this new proposal, we first have to rewind and look at the old one. Economists have been digging through mountains of data from those three big stimulus rounds, and they found some pretty big problems with that money for everyone approach. Let's unpack what they learned. Okay, so the first issue was just the sheer scale of it all. Checks went out to 85% of the entire US population. Think about that. The goal was to get money into the economy fast, no questions asked, but the study argues this was like using a fire hose to water a houseplant. It was just way, way too broad. And of course, that super broad approach came with a truly colossal price tag. We're talking about roughly $850 billion with a B. That's an incredible amount of money. And when you're spending that kind of cash, you really, really want every single dollar to count. According to this research, a lot of those dollars simply didn't. And here's maybe the biggest unintended consequence of them all. All that cash flooding the system at once contributed about 3 percentage points to the inflation that we've all been feeling. You can almost hear the whoops moment in the research. Sending so much money to so many people, a lot of whom didn't need to spend it right away, just helped pour fuel on the fire of rising prices. So the takeaway is pretty clear. It was incredibly expensive, inefficient, and it came with that inflationary sting in the tail. Okay, so if blanketing the entire country with cash isn't the best way to go, what is? Well, the answer lies in a really simple but incredibly powerful economic idea. It all comes down to understanding the fundamental difference between two types of people, the spender and the saver. Now, the fancy official term for this is the marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. I know, sounds a little complicated, but it's really not. All it means is this. If I give you an extra dollar, what are you most likely to do with it? Are you going to go out and spend it pretty much immediately? Or are you going to stick it in the bank or maybe pay down some debt? That simple question is the absolute key to unlocking a smarter stimulus. So let's break this down. On one side, you have people with a high MPC. These are typically your low-income folks, people on a fixed income. When they get some extra cash, it immediately gets spent on necessities. We're talking rent, groceries, gas for the car. It gets put right back into the economy. On the other side, you have people with a low MPC. These are usually higher income individuals. When they get an extra check, they're far more likely to save it, invest it, maybe pay off a credit card bill. That money doesn't really move. For a stimulus to actually work, you need spenders, not savers. It's that simple. So how do you take this idea of MPC and turn it into an actual concrete plan? Well, this is where the study gets really exciting. It suggests a completely different strategy. Instead of small checks for everyone, it proposes larger, ongoing checks for a very, very specific group of people. And here it is. The proposal is for ongoing $2,000 monthly checks. But the most important word on this slide is only. These payments would be hyper-focused, going exclusively to those low-income, high-MPC individuals, the people who are guaranteed to put that money right back into circulation. It's like switching from a shotgun to a laser beam.
And the data on this is just crystal clear. The study found that when a high MPC person gets that $2,000, their spending is incredibly fast and predictable. About $1,600, that's 80%, is spent within the first 10 days. The rest of it is gone within a month. This is exactly what you want for economic stimulus. The money doesn't just sit there, it moves, it creates a ripple effect, paying for groceries, car repairs, new shoes for the kids, you name it. You know, it all just comes back to the original goal. The source material puts it perfectly. We're not looking for savers, we're looking for spenders. The entire point is to get money moving, to stimulate the economy. And to do that, you have to give it to the people who are actually going to spend it. It's right there in the name.
So when you put it all together, You take the lessons from the past and you apply this logic of MPC, you end up with a proposal that the study argues is just better from every angle. It's smarter, it's cheaper, and it's way more effective. Let's just recap the huge advantages of this kind of targeted strategy. The advantages are pretty amazing when you lay them out. First, you get a much bigger bang for your buck, a greater stimulative effect because the money is actually spent, not hoarded. Because of that incredible efficiency, the total cost would be significantly less than that $850 billion program from before. But just as important, it sends meaningful, ongoing support directly to the people who are struggling the most, all while avoiding the waste of sending checks to people who just save it. It really is a win from every single angle. And that really leaves us with the big final question, doesn't it? We've seen the flaws of the old model and the compelling logic of this new one. This idea of moving away from these broad, universal payments toward highly focused, targeted financial support, it could be a major turning point in how governments respond to economic crises. It really feels like a blueprint for a future where help isn't just more generous for those who need it most, but a whole lot smarter for the economy as a whole. We hear all these huge economic headlines, but what do they actually mean for us, for our families? Today, we're digging into exactly that. What happens when massive government stimulus policies land right in your bank account? We're going to break down how it all translates into real-world impact and go way beyond the numbers you see on the news. So, here's how we're going to break it all down for you. We'll start with those mind-boggling big numbers and funnel it down to a single household budget. Then we'll get into the human impact, see exactly where the money went, talk about making that impact stick, and wrap up with what it all means for policy that's really about people. All right, let's dive right in. The main idea here is to connect the dots, between this massive, abstract government policy and the very real-world situation of paying your bills every month. So you turn on the news, right? And you hear these numbers, hundreds of billions, sometimes trillions of dollars. I mean, they're so huge they don't even feel real. It's a scale that feels totally disconnected from our day-to-day lives, almost like something out of a textbook, instead of a force that's actually shaping our communities. So, how do we bring these astronomical figures down to earth, to the conversations happening around the kitchen table? The real question is, how does a trillion-dollar policy turn into something that actually helps you cover rent, buy your groceries, or finally get the car fixed? That's where this story gets really personal and, frankly, really interesting. Okay, let's put a real number on this. During one of the stimulus rounds, a typical family of four could have gotten a single payment of $5,600. Now, for some people, that's a nice little cushion. But for millions and millions of families, a sum like this isn't just helpful, it was an absolute game changer that could completely reshape their finances for months to come. And look at what that money really means. Based on national averages, that $5,600 isn't just a number. It's almost 5 months of rent. That's housing security. It's 7 months of food on the table. It's over a year of keeping the lights on. All of a sudden, that one-time payment represents real, tangible stability. A moment to finally breathe. Okay, so having that financial breathing room is huge. But the impact, well, it goes way deeper than just balancing a checkbook. It has these profound personal effects on our actual well-being. And, the data is super clear on this. The relief isn't felt equally by everyone. For the most financially vulnerable groups, it was an absolute lifeline. Think about low-income households living paycheck to paycheck. That money got spent almost immediately on things they desperately needed. For seniors on a fixed income, it might have meant not having to choose between medication and food. For someone who'd lost their job, it was a bridge to finding new work. And for families with kids, well, it helped cover all those endless extra costs. And this, right here, gets to the absolute heart of it. It's not just about the money, it's about mental and emotional health. Nearly 8 out of every 10 people said they felt less anxiety about paying their bills. That is a massive psychological shift. It's like a heavy weight just being lifted off their shoulders. And that feeling of relief, it creates this incredible ripple effect through a person's entire life. When you're not in constant crisis mode, you sleep better, your mental health improves. We all know financial stress can strain relationships, so easing that burden can actually make families stronger. And since that chronic stress takes a physical toll, this relief can even lead to better health. People are just freed up to think more clearly and make better decisions for their future. So we know who benefited and how it made them feel, but where did all that money actually go? What did people spend it on? Looking at the spending patterns gives us this crucial insight into what people really needed in that moment. Well, the answer is pretty clear. Overwhelmingly, the funds went straight to the absolute essentials. The biggest piece of the pie went to things like housing, food, and utilities. The next biggest? Paying down debt, especially that high-interest credit card debt that can trap families for years. After that, we saw people catching up on things they'd put off, like fixing a broken fridge or getting essential car repairs. And finally, some of it went into savings, building a small buffer for the next emergency. And this is so important to understand. The spending doesn't just stop with the person who got the check. It creates what you could call a personal multiplier effect. When you use that money to pay your rent, you're helping your landlord pay their mortgage. When you buy groceries, you're supporting that local store and its employees. That spending helps stabilize the entire local economy from the ground up. Of course, it's also true that a dollar isn't a dollar everywhere in the country, right? The same amount of money can have a wildly different impact depending on where you live. In a super expensive city like New York or LA, a $1,400 check might not even cover a single month's rent. It helps for sure, but its power is limited. But in a rural town or a smaller city, that same amount could cover rent or utilities for several months, making it way more transformative for that family. All right, let's shift gears for a second and talk about something really crucial, the fact that these payments were temporary. A one-time cash infusion is incredibly powerful, but the real question for personal finance is how you turn it into something that lasts. We have to remember what these checks were designed to be. They were a temporary bridge, right? A way to get people through a really tough spot. They were never meant to be an ongoing, permanent solution. And understanding that is totally key to using the money in the smartest way possible. So for a lot of people, the goal was to use this one-time boost to build a stronger foundation for the future. And that usually looks like one of three things. First, building an emergency fund. Even a small one can stop the next unexpected expense from becoming a full-blown crisis. Second, attacking high-interest debt, which frees up your money every single month moving forward. And third, investing in yourself. Maybe a training course or a certification that can boost your earning power for the long haul. So, after looking at all of this, the numbers, the spending, the personal strategies, what's the big takeaway here? What does it all add up to? You know, at the end of the day, you have to peel back all the layers of economic theory and political debate. Because behind every single one of these statistics, there's a human story. It's the story of a parent who can finally buy their kid the right school supplies. It's a senior who doesn't have to choose between their medicine and their groceries. It's a family that gets to stay in their home. And that really leaves us with one big question as we look to the future. We've seen just how powerful this kind of direct help can be. So, when the next crisis hits, and there will always be a next one, how do we build on these lessons? How can we design policies that aren't just effective on a spreadsheet, but are truly, deeply, and personally transformative for the people who need that help the most? That's a conversation we need to be having.
So, is another stimulus check on the horizon for 2025? Man, it's a question that's just swimming in rumors and speculation online. Today, we're going to cut through all that noise and give you the real, fact-based answers you're looking for.
All right, this is the big one, isn't it? It's the question that's on pretty much everyone's mind, and it's probably why you're here. So let's not waste any time. Let's just get right to it.
Okay, let's be crystal clear about this right from the start. As of right now, no new federal stimulus payment has been approved. I know you might see stuff floating around on social media, but the bottom line is Congress has not passed any new laws to send out more direct payments.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll start out the facts from the fiction. Then we're going to dive into the key economic numbers that lawmakers are watching. We'll also look at what it would actually take to trigger new payments. After that, we'll walk you through the whole process, from a bill to your bank account, and we'll wrap up with what you can do to be ready.
Okay, first things first, let's get a really clear picture of what's happening right now. It is so easy to get swept up in all the online chatter, so it's absolutely crucial to know the difference between what's official and what's just, well, noise.
And this really is the key takeaway at the federal level. Congress hasn't passed a thing, but, and this is a really interesting twist, that isn't the whole story. You know, while the conversation in D.C. has pretty much stalled, the idea of direct payments is still very much alive in the states. I mean, we've seen places like New York, California, and Georgia all issue their own relief. So that tells you there's still a real appetite for this kind of support. It's just happening on a more local level for now.
So if nothing's happening, the big question is, why? Well, to answer that, we have to look at the economic data, the same numbers that lawmakers and economists are staring at every single day. These numbers are really the foundation for any decision, so let's get into them.
First, let's talk about jobs. Right now, the unemployment rate is sitting in the low 4% range. Now, historically speaking, that's considered pretty healthy. Sure, it's ticked up a little bit, but it is nowhere near the kind of distrust level that would normally have Washington sounding the alarm bells for emergency action.
And what about inflation? Remember when it felt like prices were just skyrocketing on everything? Well, things have cooled off a lot. Inflation is now down around 2.4%, which is way closer to the Federal Reserve's 2% target. This takes a lot of the urgency away because the economy isn't running red hot anymore.
And the overall economy? We look at something called the gross domestic product, or GDP for that, and it's projected to grow just over 2%. Now, the most important part of that sentence is the word grow. The economy is expanding, not shrinking. We are not in a recession, which is almost always the starting point for this kind of massive stimulus.
This chart right here really puts it all into perspective. See that bar on the left? That's us right now, with unemployment around 4.2%. Now look at the bar on the right. That represents the historical danger zone, that 6 to 7% level where Congress has traditionally felt like they have to step in and do something. You can see there's a pretty big gap between where we are today and a full-blown crisis.
Okay, so if the economy is chugging along, what could possibly change all this? What are the specific events or economic shifts that could suddenly put stimulus checks right back on the front burner in Washington?
You're going to want to keep an eye out for these 4 potential game changers. First, if unemployment starts climbing and crosses that 6% threshold we just talked about. Second, a huge drop in the stock market could totally wreck consumer confidence. Third, some kind of major geopolitical crisis or a massive natural disaster could send a shockwave through the economy. And finally, well, never ever underestimate election year politics. Stimulus checks tend to be pretty popular with voters.
You know, the whole debate is really complex, and there are good arguments on both sides. People who are for it will tell you that a lot of families are still really struggling, and that direct payments could stop a slowdown from becoming a recession. But on the other side, opponents will point to the stable economy and the gigantic national debt, and they'll argue that more stimulus would just pour gasoline on the fire of inflation.
So let's imagine one of those triggers actually happens. How does an idea for a check become actual money that you can spend? Let's pull back the curtain on that process. It's a long road with a lot of steps.
It all kicks off with the economic data. The numbers have to look bad enough for people to agree there's a problem. Then a member of Congress or the president proposes a bill. That bill has to fight its way through committees. If it survives, it goes to the full House and Senate for debates and votes. If, and that's a big if, it passes both, it finally goes to the president to be signed into law. Only then does the IRS get the green light for the final step, sending out the money.
And check this out. This timeline shows just how fast that last step can be. Once the political fight is over, the government has gotten incredibly good at this. The first big one, the CARES Act, took about 2 weeks. By the time the American Rescue Plan came around in 2021, money was hitting bank accounts within a week. The big takeaway here is that the system is built and ready to go fast, once a decision is actually made.
So, with everything so up in the air, the best thing you can do is focus on what you can actually control. Really, the most important thing is just to be prepared, whether a stimulus payment ever shows up or not.
Here are 4 simple, really practical steps you can take. First, go to the IRS website and make sure they have your current mailing address and direct deposit info. That is the #1 thing you can do to get paid quickly. Second, file your taxes every year, even if you don't owe anything. This keeps you in the system. Third, get your news from reliable sources and official government websites, not from some random post on social media. And finally, have a plan for what you do with the money, whether it's paying down debt or beefing up your savings.
Okay, we have covered a ton of ground here. The current situation, the economic data, what could change things, the whole process. So after all that, what is the single most important thing you should walk away with?
It's this. Any decision about future stimulus checks will be driven by cold, hard economic data, like unemployment and GDP, not by online rumors. So your best strategy isn't to just cross your fingers and hope for a check. It's to be prepared. Getting your financial house in order is always the smartest move, no matter what happens in Washington. And that brings us to one last, really big idea to chew on. After the massive government response to the pandemic, have direct payments like these become a permanent new tool in the economic toolbox? Is this something we should just expect now, every time the economy stumbles? That right there is the bigger question that's going to shape how we manage the economy for years to come.
Today, we are going to tackle a huge question, one that I know is on a lot of people's minds, especially if you're on a fixed income. And that question is all about financial relief. Is more on the way? But to find the answer, we're not going to get bogged down in politics. Nope, we're going to follow the data, we're going to look at the history, and we're going to track the economic signals that tell the real story.
All right, let's just jump right in. Is 2025 the year we finally see another stimulus check? Maybe for $2,000, maybe even more? I mean, let's be real, people are struggling. It's been a tough few years, and a lot of folks are looking for any kind of break they can get. So what's really going on? Are we going to see another big round of payments hit our bank accounts next year?
You know, the funny thing is, the answer to that question has nothing to do with petitions or online chatter. Lawmakers don't just act because we ask them to. The real trigger, the thing that actually makes a stimulus payment happen, is 100% tied to the health of the U.S. economy. And once you grasp that connection, honestly, the whole picture gets a lot clearer.
So let's break this down. There's a fundamental principle at play here, a kind of simple rule that dictates when the government decides to step in with this kind of major financial help. And it's actually a pretty predictable mechanism. That is, if you know what you're looking for.
I want you to picture a seesaw at a playground. On one side, you've got the strength of the economy. On the other side, you have the likelihood of a stimulus check. Now, when the economy is strong, it's booming, unemployment is low, companies are hiring, that side of the seesaw is planted firmly on the ground. The chance of stimulus? Very, very low. But what happens when the economy gets weak? When it starts contracting, unemployment starts ticking up, and you hear whispers of a recession? Well, that side of the seesaw goes way up in the air, which brings the stimulus side crashing down, making it way more likely.
This brings us to a concept called inverse correlation. Now, I know that sounds a little jargony, but the idea is super simple. When one thing goes up, the other goes down. They're opposites. A stimulus payment isn't a reward for a good economy. It's a rescue tool for a weak one. The government uses it when they think the economy is about to fall into a recession and it needs a jolt to get people spending again. This is probably the single most important thing to understand in all of this.
And look, this isn't just some theory. It is a clear, undeniable pattern that we have seen repeat itself every single time our economy has faced a major crisis, for more than 2 decades now. History really gives us a crystal clear roadmap here.
Just think back over the last 3 major recessions. In 2001, the dot-com bubble burst. And what happened? Stimulus checks were issued. Fast forward to 2008, the housing market completely collapses, and it takes the entire economy down with it. The government's response? You guessed it, stimulus checks. And then, of course, in 2020, the pandemic shuts down the entire world, triggering a massive recession. And what did they do? Once again, stimulus checks. It's the same play every single time.
Let's look at the actual numbers. Back in 2001, after that tech bubble popped, the government sent out checks for $300. Now at the time, that was seen as a pretty big deal to try and stabilize things.
Then we jumped to the massive financial crisis of 2008. The economic damage was just immense. So the government responded again, but this time the checks were for $600. Keep that number in your head. It doubled from the last recession.
And that brings us to 2020. The economy basically slammed on the brakes overnight. It was completely unprecedented. So lawmakers passed the CARES Act, and that very first stimulus check, it was for $1,200. Do you see it? That number doubled again from the 2008 amount.
And this is where it gets really fascinating. Because when you put these numbers side by side, it's not just random. A very clear and kind of curious trend emerges. It's a distinct pattern of escalation.
I mean, the math here is it's incredibly straightforward. From $300 in 2001, it doubled to $600 in 2008. Then from $600, it doubled again to $1,200 in 2020. Every single time a major recession hits, that initial relief payment has doubled. That can't be a coincidence, right?
So naturally, this makes you ask the question, if this historical trend were to continue, what would the math suggest is next? Well, if you double $1,200, you get $2,400. Now, let me be perfectly clear. This is not a prediction. It's not a promise. It's simply an observation based on a very clear historical pattern. But it is a pretty interesting thought, isn't it? Okay, so this all brings us to the most important question of all. If a weak economy is the trigger, what are the specific red flags we should be watching for right now as we head into 2025? Think of this as your personal toolkit for seeing what's coming down the tracks. All right, these are the headlines you need to pay attention to.
First, rising unemployment claims. This is the big one. It's a direct signal that businesses are hurting and jobs are being lost. Second, keep an eye on the Federal Reserve. When the Fed starts cutting interest rates like they began to do in September of 2024, it's their way of saying, uh-oh, things are slowing down too much. They're trying to give the economy a shot of adrenaline. And finally, just listen to the language on the financial news. When you hear words like softening, slowing, or contracting over and over again, those aren't just buzzwords. That's the consensus that the seesaw is starting to tilt.
And you have to remember, while the economic slowdown can feel kind of gradual, the actual shift into a full-blown crisis and the government's response can happen in the blink of an eye. Seriously. Just think back to early 2020. In February, most of us were living our lives completely normally. By March, everything was shut down. And by early April, stimulus checks were already starting to hit people's accounts. It can go from 0 to 100 in just a matter of weeks. It happens that fast.
So, the real takeaway here is this. Your best forecast isn't going to come from listening to politicians' promises or signing online petitions. It's going to come from you paying attention to those key economic signs we just talked about. The economy tells the real story, long before any official announcement is ever made. The data, that's the real crystal ball.
So, as we wrap this all up, the picture becomes pretty clear, right? We have the seesaw rule. A weak economy triggers stimulus. We have the historical precedent. It has happened in every single major recession for the last 25 years. And we have that wild doubling effect in the amounts. History has basically drawn us a map, and it leaves us with one final provocative thought. The pattern seems to be set in stone. The only real question left isn't if it will repeat, but when.
You know, we've all been hearing the chatter about another stimulus check, but today we're going to dig into an argument that says maybe we're all asking the wrong question. What if the next round of aid wasn't for everybody, but was laser-focused on the people who truly needed the most?
I mean, you see it all the time, right? Is another $1,400 check coming? It's the question, and for a lot of people, the hope that just doesn't seem to go away.
But the analysis we're looking at today completely flips that on its head. It stops asking if we should send out more money and starts asking a much sharper question: who should actually be getting it? And you know, that one little change shifts the entire conversation from just a universal handout to a really precise tool for helping people.
So, let's start with the big idea here. The financial struggle in this country, well, it's not a one-size-fits-all problem, is it? We're not all in the same boat. So why would we all need the exact same lifeline?
And the argument laid out here is super direct. It says, look, sending a check to almost everyone is just not the most efficient way to solve the problem. The real power could come from a targeted rescue mission for those who are really, truly struggling right now. This whole thing really sets up a clear choice between two very different philosophies. So how does this targeted idea actually stack up against those big, broad stimulus checks we've all seen before? Let's break it down.
Okay, so on one side, you've got the way we've done things before. Broad, universal checks that went out to something like 85% of the entire population. And yeah, that came with a really high price tag, but on the other side, you have this proposed approach. It's focused, it's targeted, it goes only to low and fixed income folks, which means the cost is much, much lower and way more concentrated. It's basically the difference between casting a giant net and using a scalpel.
So, if we're going to get targeted, who exactly are we talking about? Who is in this group? Well, the analysis points to a pretty specific slice of the population that's facing the toughest financial battles. The starting point is a number that's, well, it's kind of hard to ignore. 40 million. Right now, there are 40 million people in this country living in poverty. That is a staggering figure all by itself.
But believe it or not, that 40 million is just the beginning. When you widen the lens just a little bit to include people who are very low income, the ones living just a hair above the poverty line, that number explodes to about 100 million people. Let that sink in. That means for every 3 people you meet, one of them is struggling in a pretty significant way.
All right, let's talk money. Because when you actually run the numbers, the argument for being more targeted gets incredibly clear. So how do the costs really compare?
So check this out. To send a one-time $1,400 check to 50 million of the most vulnerable people, that would cost around $70 billion. If you expand that to the full 100 million people living in or near poverty, you're looking at about $140 billion. Now, I know, these are massive numbers, but context is everything here.
And here is where that context just becomes jaw-dropping. That targeted check for 50 million people, $70 billion. The last universal check that went out,
a colossal $358 billion. The difference isn't just big, it's on a completely different planet.
Let me put that another way, because this is really the heart of the whole financial argument. For the price of that one universal check, you could send five separate checks to the 50 million people who need it the absolute most. Just imagine that. The potential for providing sustained, meaningful help is just, wow, it's on a whole other level.
But of course, anytime you talk about sending out billions of dollars, there's always that one huge question that hangs over the entire conversation, and that's inflation. What would this kind of spending actually do to the economy?
It's the critical question, right? Wouldn't pumping even $70 or $140 billion into the economy make prices spike for everyone? I mean, that's what a lot of folks think happened with the last few rounds of stimulus.
Well, the argument here is that it all comes down to how the money gets spent. People with low incomes are way more likely to use that money for immediate, essential needs. We're talking about groceries, keeping the lights on, paying for medicine, or just trying to pay down some debt. They're not running out to buy new TVs or book vacations.
So here's the crucial point. Because this money is going straight to essentials, to covering costs that already exist, it helps people stay afloat without necessarily overheating the whole economy. This analysis suggests the impacts on inflation would be negligible. That's a huge contrast to universal checks, which can definitely fuel widespread consumer spending and drive up prices.
And that really brings us to the final thought here. What we've walked through is a case built on some pretty simple math and really clear data. It suggests that by focusing our help where it's needed most, we could actually have a much bigger impact for a fraction of the cost. So the question it leaves us with is this: could this data-driven approach be the blueprint for how we handle economic support from now on?
We're diving into a huge wave of legislative proposals, all aimed at one thing: increasing your Social Security, SSI, SSDI, and VA benefits. Honestly, there's more activity right now than we've seen in a very long time, so we're going to break down exactly what it could mean for your wallet.
So the big question on everyone's mind, right? Could your benefits actually go up soon? The potential for a real, significant change is higher now than it has been in decades. Let's unpack what these proposals could mean for your monthly check.
Okay, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll cover the wins that are already law. Then we'll look at the bills that have a really high chance of passing next. After that, we'll get into the huge, ambitious reform packages. And finally, the part you've been waiting for, we'll put it all together to see the total potential boost to your benefits.
All right, first up, let's talk about the victories that are already on the books. These are concrete changes that are already making a difference and building momentum for what's to come.
The first major one is the Social Security Fairness Act. This is a huge deal. For decades, provisions called the Windfall Elimination Provision, or WEEP, and the Government Pension Offset, or GPO, have cut the Social Security benefits of millions of public servants, people like teachers, firefighters, and police officers. Well, this new law gets rid of them.
And the impact, it's just massive. We're talking about $17 billion being restored to 3.1 million beneficiaries. This means those teachers, firefighters, and police officers will finally get the full benefits they earned. For some, this could increase their monthly checks by over $1,000. It's truly life-changing stuff.
And another huge win that's already signed, sealed, and delivered is for our nation's veterans. The Elizabeth Dole Act is a massive modernization of the entire VA system. It's all about expanding support for caregivers, giving veterans more healthcare choices, and just making the whole claims process a lot smoother.
Okay, so building on that momentum, let's look at what's likely coming down the pipeline next. These are the proposals moving through Congress right now with a really strong chance of becoming law, mainly because they have support from both sides of the aisle. Now, this next one, it's probably one of the most significant bipartisan efforts happening right now. We're talking about the SSI Savings Penalty Elimination Act. You see, for decades, folks on SSI have been stuck with these incredibly low asset limits. Basically, they've been punished for trying to save money. This bill is aimed at finally fixing that.
And just look at these numbers, because the change they're proposing is, well, it's night and day. Right now, the asset limit for an individual on SSI is just $2,000. That number hasn't budged since 1984. This bill would raise that all the way up to $20,000 for an individual, and from $3,000 to $10,000 for a couple.
This chart really just drives the point home, doesn't it? That is a massive, tenfold increase. This isn't just a small tweak for inflation, it's a complete shift in thinking. It would finally allow millions of people to save up for an emergency, a car repair, a sudden medical bill, without that constant fear of losing their essential benefits. The support for this is huge, by the way.
And for our veterans, there are a few other key bills that have a really high chance of passing. First is the annual Cost of Living Adjustment Act. This is pretty much a tradition, and it just makes sure VA disability pay keeps up with inflation. Then you've got two bills to fix the process. One to stop claims from being denied just because a veteran missed an exam, and another to help cut through the red tape for family caregivers trying to appeal a decision.
Okay, now let's shift gears and talk about the really big picture stuff. These aren't just small tweaks. These are proposals for major reform. They outline a bold new vision for the future of Social Security and SSI.
This quote from Senator Bernie Sanders really says it all. Expand Social Security, don't cut it. That single idea is the foundation of his signature bill, the Social Security Expansion Act. The core principle is simple. With so many people facing a retirement crisis, benefits need to go up, not down.
So how would his bill actually do that? Well, it's got four key parts. First, a straight-up $200 monthly increase for every single beneficiary. Second, it changes how the annual COLA is calculated to a formula called the CPIE, which does a better job of tracking healthcare costs for seniors. It also boosts the minimum benefit and pays for all of this by making sure the wealthiest Americans pay their fair share.
And he's not the only one pushing for big changes. Congressman John Larson has been on this for years, and he uses this phrase, fierce urgency of now, to really emphasize that we're past the point of small fixes. A big, comprehensive solution is needed, and it's needed now. His bill is called the Social Security 2100 Act.
So Larson's bill, the Social Security 2100 Act, takes a slightly different angle. It also includes an immediate benefit increase, but it's a percentage, a 2% bump for everyone, which would actually be the first increase like that in over 50 years. It also adds some cool new things, like a 5% boost for people who've been on benefits for 15 years or more, and it creates caregiver credits to help folks who took time out of the workforce to care for a loved one.
This table makes it super easy to see the two approaches side by side. You've got the flat $200 increase from the Expansion Act versus the 2% bump from the 2100 Act. But notice where they agree. Both want to switch the COLA calculation to the more accurate CPIE. And the 2100 Act adds that unique boost for long-term beneficiaries.
All right, now for another huge idea that's getting a ton of buzz, especially with senior advocacy groups. The You Earn It, You Keep It Act. And its goal is about as simple and powerful as it gets. Completely stop the federal government from taxing Social Security benefits, period.
Yeah, a lot of people are actually shocked when they find out their benefits can be taxed at all. But as this chart shows, if your income is over a certain amount, up to 85% of your benefits can be hit with federal income tax. This act would just wipe that out completely, putting hundreds, maybe even thousands of dollars a year right back into your pocket.
Okay, now for the 7 million Americans on Supplemental Security Income, or SSI. There's a proposal on the table that is, and I don't say this lightly, absolutely transformational. It's called the SSI Restoration Act, and its vision is to finally lift SSI benefits out of deep poverty by setting them at 100% of the federal poverty level. So what does that actually mean in dollars and cents? It comes down to this number, a potential increase of around $785 per month for an individual. That would nearly double the current maximum benefit, pushing it over $1,750 a month. This one change could lift millions of our most vulnerable citizens out of poverty.
Okay, this is the part you've been waiting for. We've gone through all the different proposals. Now let's add it all up. Let's see what this could really mean for your bottom line if these major reforms actually pass.
So to figure this out, let's start with a baseline. In 2025, the average Social Security retirement benefit is about $1,976 a month. Let's use that as our starting point and see what happens.
Okay, so if the major proposals we've been talking about actually get passed in some combination, what could that average retiree see? We're talking about an increase of somewhere between $340 and $540 every single month. That's a yearly boost of between $4,000 and $6,500. That is a serious, significant increase.
So you might be asking, how do we get to a number that big? Well, here's a quick breakdown. A final bill could have that flat $200 increase from the Expansion Act, or maybe it's the 2% bump from the 2100 Act, which adds about $40. And if they eliminate taxes on benefits, that could add another $100 to $300. You start combining these ideas and you get to that really powerful total.
And for folks on SSI, the change is even more staggering. I mean, we're not just talking about a little boost here. We are talking about a fundamental redesign of the entire program to finally provide a real living wage.
It's really a three-pronged attack on poverty. First, you double the monthly benefit. Second, you raise that asset limit all the way to $20,000 so people can actually save. And third, you get rid of the penalties for getting married. You put those three things together and you transform the program from a poverty-level safety net into a real living wage.
And let's not forget our veterans. For them, all of this boils down to two really important things. First, more financial stability, with that annual COLA making sure their benefits keep up with costs. And second, just dramatically better services, getting claims processed faster, getting fair decisions, and getting more support for their caregivers.
So with all this happening, what are the key dates you should circle on your calendar? Well, definitely watch for the official 2026 COLA announcement in October. Keep an eye out for any last-minute deals during the lame duck session after the elections in November, but the biggest action will probably start when the new Congress gets to work in January and really kicks off the budget process in the spring.
So, the big question is, with all these proposals swirling around, what's actually going to become reality? And while we don't know exactly which parts of which bills will pass, what is crystal clear is that we're in a historic moment. There is a powerful, undeniable push to finally enhance support for all beneficiaries. What happens next is up to our lawmakers. But for the first time in a long time, a real, tangible boost to your benefits is well and truly on the table.
Are you looking for some immediate financial relief? Well, you've come to the right place. In this guide, we're going to cut right through all the noise and focus on one thing: real, actual assistance programs that are funded, active, and paying out benefits today. And this right here is our promise to you. Everything we're about to cover is an existing program that you can apply for right now. We're not talking about future proposals or things that might happen down the road. This is about real support that millions of people are already getting. You know, we've done the homework for you. We've dug through dozens of programs to find ones that can make a real, immediate difference in your budget, all based on confirmed, active government assistance. Our goal is super simple. We want to give you a clear, easy-to-follow guide to programs that can either put more money in your pocket each month or help you cut down on your biggest household costs. All right, let's kick things off with the most direct way to improve your finances. We're talking about programs that actually increase your monthly income through direct cash payments. First up is a benefit that a lot of people on SSI don't even know exists: state supplements. So you have the base SSI payment from the federal government, right? Well, many states actually add their own money on top of that. And we're talking sometimes hundreds of dollars more every single month. And the difference this can make is just, it's huge. I mean, look at this. The federal SSI benefit is $967. But if you live in California, the state supplement brings that total monthly payment to almost $1,600. That is a truly life-changing increase from just one state program. And you might be thinking, okay, that's just California. But nope, it's not. New York also adds a supplement, and it's based on your living situation. As you can see, if you live alone, you get over $1,000. And for some in-care situations, it can go even higher than California's. The key takeaway here is where you live really matters. And these programs are all over the country. We see them in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Hawaii, Michigan. The list goes on. So if you receive SSI, the very first thing you should do after this is check if your state offers one of these supplemental payments. Okay, next, let's shift gears and talk about some crucial support for our nation's veterans. The VA offers pension programs that provide steady and, importantly, tax-free monthly income for those who served during wartime, have limited income, and are either over 65 or have a permanent disability. Let's talk about the numbers, because the financial impact here is massive. For a veteran with a spouse who needs help with daily activities, the maximum annual benefit is $27,609. What does that actually mean for your monthly budget? That breaks down to over $2,300 every single month, completely tax-free. Now, that really big number we just saw, that's for something called the aid and attendance pension. It's an increased amount specifically for veterans or their surviving spouses who need a little help with daily activities, things like bathing or dressing. It's there to help cover the cost of that care. Now, it's really important not to confuse that with VA disability compensation. That's a whole different thing. Here, the income boost is tied directly to your disability rating. And you can see on the chart how it works. A 10% rating gets you about $175 a month. But look at the jump to 50%. That's over $1,100. And at 100%, it's more than $3,800 a month. And that's for a veteran alone, before adding dependents. Now let's talk about those other essential household bills that just always seem to add up, right? There are targeted programs to help lower your costs for everything from energy and internet to food and housing.
When it comes to your energy bills, you've got two amazing options, and they work a little differently. Lehigh is for short-term relief. It's a one-time payment of a few $100s sent right to your utility company. But for a long-term fix, the Weatherization program gives you free home energy upgrades, like insulation, saving you thousands of dollars over time.
Look, we all know a phone and internet connection aren't luxuries anymore. They are necessities. The Federal Lifeline program gets that. It provides a discount of $9.25 every single month on either your phone or your internet bill. So, most people know SNAP helps with groceries at the supermarket. But here's a question. What if you can't cook for yourself? Well, in the states you see here, there's something called the Restaurant Meals Program, which allows you to use your EBT card for prepared meals at certain restaurants. It's a huge help. Property taxes. They can be a real budget killer for homeowners, so it is crucial to check what your state offers. For example, Pennsylvania has rebates up to $1,000. New Jersey's program goes up to $1,500. A lot of states have programs just like these to help ease that burden.
And please, whatever you do, don't forget about this stuff when you file your taxes. A tax credit, like the one for the elderly or disabled, is so powerful because it's a dollar-for-dollar reduction of the tax you actually owe. A tax deduction is also great. It just lowers your taxable income. And you might even be able to claim both.
Okay, we have gone through a ton of information. Programs for income, healthcare, household bills, but all of it is useless if you don't know how to actually get these benefits. So this right here is the most important part. This is your action plan.
So grab a pen or just listen close. Here is your 5-step roadmap. Number 1, start with your local area agency on aging. They have counselors who can help. 2, go online and use the screening tool at benefits.gov. 3, on the phone, just dial 211 for local resources. 4, for state-specific help, contact your state's Department of Aging. And 5, for anything military-related, go straight to your local VA office.
And before you dive in, here are a few pro tips to make this whole process way easier. Don't just apply for one program, apply for several at once. Definitely ask for help from benefits counselors, that's what they're there for. Have your documents ready to go, and remember to reapply every year because the limits change.
All right, there you have it. A full roadmap to real benefits that are out there right now, just waiting for you. From boosting your income with state supplements and VA pensions to slashing your healthcare and utility bills, the help is really there. The only question left is, which of these programs will you investigate first?
You know, there's this huge wave of proposals making its way through Washington right now, all designed to give a major boost to Social Security, SSI, and VA benefits. We're going to go deep. We're going to break down exactly what's on the table, what it could mean for your bank account, and what you need to keep an eye on. So let's get into it. So let's just start with the biggest question, right? The one that cuts right to the chase. Could you really see an extra $2,400 a year? Maybe even more? Now, I know that sounds like a flashy headline, but it's a very real number that's at the core of a major legislative push. We're not just talking about your standard cost of living adjustment here. This is about big foundational increases being proposed from a bunch of different directions. And look, that number isn't just wishful thinking, it's based on the fact that there are literally dozens of bills floating around Congress right now. This isn't just one single long-shot bill. No, this is a coordinated effort from many different angles, covering everything from Social Security, retirement and disability, to SSI, and, of course, veterans benefits. So to make sense of all this, we need a clear plan. Here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get into the major Social Security proposals. These affect the biggest group of people. Then, we're going to look at some really transformative changes for SSI and disability. After that, we'll cover the new enhancements being proposed for our nation's veterans. And finally, we'll bring it all home with the bottom line. What does all of this put together actually mean for you? Okay, let's kick things off with the big one, Social Security. The ideas here are all over the map. Everything from raising your monthly check across the board to getting rid of federal taxes on your benefits entirely. The potential financial hit here is, well, it's absolutely huge. So this is the number that's grabbing all the headlines, and for good reason. We're talking about an extra $200 a month. Every single month. It comes from one of the most ambitious plans out there. And for millions of people, a flat increase like this would be an immediate life-changing boost. See, it's not a percentage that helps higher earners more. It's a flat boost that lifts everyone up, especially those who need it the most. This whole idea is part of what's called the Social Security Expansion Act. The main event, of course, is that $200 a month raise. But there's more to it. It also wants to change how the cost of living adjustment, the COLA, is calculated. It would switch to something called the CPIE, which is the Consumer Price Index for the elderly. The thinking is pretty simple. This index actually tracks what seniors spend their money on, especially healthcare, which could mean bigger COLAs every year. And, super important, the bill also deals with funding by making sure earnings over $250,000 are taxed, which would keep the whole system solvent for another 75 years. But a flat $200 isn't the only idea on the table. Another major proposal is looking at a percentage-based increase, specifically a 2% bump for every single person. Now, 2% might sound small, but it's a really big deal because it would be the first across-the-board increase like this, totally separate from the annual COLA, in more than 50 years. It's basically an admission that benefits just haven't kept up. This one is called the Social Security 2100 Act, and it's got a few different parts. So first, you have that immediate 2% bump for everyone. Then it adds another 5% boost for people who've been on Social Security for 15 years or more, recognizing that savings tend to run out later in life. Just like the other bill, it also wants to use that more accurate CPIE for COLAs. But maybe the most interesting part is the introduction of caregiver credits. This fixes a huge inequity, giving Social Security credits to people, mostly women, who had to step out of the workforce to care for a kid or a sick family member. It makes sure they aren't punished for doing that vital work. So, besides just adding more money to your check, how about letting you keep more of the money you already get? And that brings us to a number I think everyone can get behind, 0%. We're talking about the federal income tax that a lot of retirees have to pay on their Social Security. This plan would mean more take-home pay without even changing your benefit amount. A lot of people are actually surprised to learn this, but depending on your total income, up to 85% of your Social Security benefits can be taxed by the federal government. Well, the You Earn It, You Keep It Act would just get rid of that tax completely. For a ton of middle-income retirees, we're talking about hundreds, maybe even thousands of dollars back in their pockets every year. And it's paid for in a similar way to the other plans, by applying the payroll tax to incomes over $250,000. Okay, let's shift gears and talk about supplemental security income, or SSI, and disability benefits. The proposals here are, and I'm not exaggerating, some of the most overdue and potentially life-changing. We're talking about updating rules that literally haven't been touched in decades. I mean, just look at this. To get SSI, you can't have more than $2,000 in assets. That limit was set in 1984. 1984! And it's never been changed. It's a rule that basically traps people in poverty, making it impossible to save for an emergency like your car breaking down. The proposed new limit? $20,000. That's not just a raise, it's a total change in philosophy that would finally let people with disabilities and low-income seniors build a small safety net for themselves. And here's the kicker. This particular change has a really good chance of actually happening. The SSI Savings Penalty Elimination Act has incredible support from both sides of the aisle. We're talking Republicans and Democrats sponsoring it together. Plus, over 200 organizations are backing it, including some you wouldn't expect, like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It's just a common-sense update that everyone seems to agree on. But it's not just about savings. There are plans to seriously increase the monthly payment itself. Right now, the average SSI benefit is around $967, which leaves people way below the federal poverty line. The SSI Restoration Act wants to fix that by raising the benefit to 100% of the poverty level. That jump to over $1,700 a month, that's the difference between barely scraping by and actually having enough for rent, food, and basic necessities. And this quote really just says it all, doesn't it? It's not a small tweak. For the millions of Americans on SSI, this would be a complete transformation. It's about moving from a system that basically just manages poverty to one that offers a way out of it, closer to something like a living wage. And finally for this section, we've got the marriage penalty. This is one of those rules that just makes you scratch your head. Right now, if two people on SSI get married, their combined benefit gets cut by 25%. They literally get less money as a married couple than they did as two single people. It's a rule that actively punishes partnership. So there are two bipartisan bills that want to fix this outdated, frankly unfair policy and just stop penalizing people for getting married. All right, now let's turn our attention to the folks who have served our country. When we talk about veterans' benefits, there's a pretty consistent, reliable annual increase, but there are also some new ideas designed to make the whole support system work better. For veterans, one of the most dependable numbers to watch is that annual COLA. For 2025, the projection is sitting at around 2.5%. While all these other proposals get debated back and forth, this is the one increase that veterans can usually count on to make sure their disability compensation and other benefits keep up with rising costs. It's really the foundation of their financial planning for the year ahead.
And that's really the key word here, reliability. Unlike some of the more controversial bills we've talked about, the Veterans COLA Act is basically an annual tradition in Congress. It has wide, unwavering support from both parties. It's one of the few things that veterans and their families can pretty much bank on passing every single year.
But it's not just about the COLA. Other bipartisan bills are focused on just making the system work better. For example, the Review Every Veteran's Claim Act would stop the VA from denying a claim just because a veteran missed a doctor's appointment. It forces the VA to do its homework. And the Veterans Caregiver Appeals Modernization Act is all about cutting the red tape for family caregivers trying to get support. Both of these are about making the system more fair and efficient.
Okay, we have covered a ton of ground. Social Security, SSI, VA benefits. So let's pull all of this together and really look at the bottom line. What could all these different proposals, if they passed, actually mean for your future?
So let's lay it all out. You can see the bills with a high chance of passing, like the Veterans COLA and that SSI savings update. Those have that strong bipartisan support we keep talking about. Then you've got the ones with a moderate chance, like the Social Security 2100 Act, that have a lot of support but will take some serious negotiation. And then you have the really ambitious ones, like the Expansion Act, which faces a tougher fight but also offers the biggest payday. So, to see how this could really play out, let's just imagine a hypothetical retiree. If the Social Security Expansion Act passed, boom, that's an extra $200 a month. The 2% boost from the 2100 Act might add another $40, and getting rid of federal taxes could save them, let's say, $150 a month. All of a sudden, you're looking at a combined increase of $390 a month. That's over $4,600 a year. It just shows you how all these different bills could stack up to make a huge difference. The Social Security Expansion Act, well, it's not about short-term relief at all. This is designed to deliver a permanent, structural change to your retirement income. This isn't just a one-time check, it's a fundamental increase to your monthly benefit from now on. And here's the heart of it, the big number, a proposed increase of $200 per month for every single recipient. That's a direct, across-the-board raise. An extra $200 a month isn't just a small tweak. For so many people, that's the difference between just getting by and actually falling behind. It's money for prescriptions, for keeping the lights on, for just having a little breathing room in your budget, month after month after month. And this chart just lays out the long-term difference perfectly. The tariff rebate, it's a one-and-done $600 boost. But the Expansion Act's $200 a month, that adds up to $2,400 over the course of a year. That is 4 times the financial impact, and that higher amount becomes your new baseline for every single year after that. I mean, the difference is just night and day. But hold on, because the Expansion Act goes even further. It's not just about raising benefits for everyone, it's also about creating a really critical safety net. The plan would establish a new minimum benefit, what they're calling an income floor, to make sure that no one who depends on Social Security is forced to live below the poverty line. So what does a number like this actually mean for someone's wallet? Well, the bill sets this new minimum benefit at 125% of the federal poverty line. In 2025, that would work out to about $1,630 a month. Think about that. For a retiree who's struggling on just $1,000 a month right now, this would be a raise of over $600 every single month. For the lowest earning seniors, a change like this would be absolutely life-changing. And there's one more huge piece to this puzzle. The Expansion Act would completely change how your annual cost of living adjustments, your COLs, are calculated. For years, seniors have been saying that their annual raises just don't keep up with what they're actually spending. And they're right. That's because the current formula is tied to an inflation index for city workers, not retirees. This bill would switch to a senior-focused index, one that gives more weight to the things retirees spend the most on, like healthcare and housing. The whole goal is to deliver bigger, more accurate annual raises that actually reflect the inflation you experience. Okay, we've just explored some incredible possibilities for bigger checks. But now we really need to ground ourselves back in reality. These are still just proposals. And in a divided Congress, as we all know, nothing is ever guaranteed. So let's talk about what you can control, right here, right now. Look, it is exciting to think about an extra $2,400 a year.
But it would be a huge mistake to start spending that money before it's actually signed into law. The most powerful tool you have right now isn't hope, it's knowledge and preparation. Really understanding your current situation is the key to navigating whatever comes next. Are these plans actually enough to secure your retirement for the long haul? They're a huge step, for sure, but they also shine a spotlight on this much bigger debate about the future of Social Security. The best thing you can do is stay informed, stay prepared, and keep planning like your future depends on it. Because, well, it does.
If you receive Social Security, SSI, or VA benefits, you really need to pay attention to what's happening in Washington right now. It's not an exaggeration to say there's a flood of new proposals, ideas that could seriously increase your monthly check and completely change the rules. So we're going to break it all down and figure out what this could actually mean for you and your financial security.
And when I say a flood, I mean it. To give you a sense of the scale here, we're talking about more than 80 distinct legislative proposals. Just let that number sink in. This isn't just one or two little bills. This is a massive, system-wide effort to reform and, in many cases, expand these absolutely critical programs. We're talking about everything from the dollar amount you get each month, to the rules about saving money, to whether you have to pay taxes on your benefits at all.
Look, this is not business as usual. The sheer volume of bills being debated right now is historic. We are seeing more legislative activity on this front than at any time in recent memory. And what that means for you, the beneficiary, is that this is probably the single biggest opportunity for real positive change that we've seen in decades. The conversation has hit a boiling point.
Okay, 80+ proposals is a lot. It's kind of overwhelming, right? So the big question, really the only question that matters, is which of these ideas could actually put more money in your pocket? Which bills have a real shot of making it across the finish line, and how would they directly impact your monthly check? Well, that's exactly what we're here to do, to cut through all that noise and focus on the proposals that could genuinely change your financial future.
All right, let's dive in. And before we even get to what's being proposed, it's super important to talk about the progress that's already been made. This isn't just talk. This movement is already delivering real results, with some major laws already signed, sealed, and delivered.
These two wins really show that the momentum is real. First up, the Social Security Fairness Act. This is a huge deal for about 3.1 million public servants. We're talking teachers, firefighters, police officers. For years, their benefits were cut by these two really frustrating rules called WEP and GPO. Well, this law gets rid of those, restoring their full earned benefits. Second, there's the Elizabeth Dole VA Act, which is a major overhaul of the VA system. It expands support for caregivers and, crucially, helps get benefits to veterans much, much faster. The key thing here? These aren't just ideas anymore. They are the law of the land.
So, with those wins officially on the books, the stage is now set for even bigger changes. Let's sift through that massive mountain of proposals and pull out the true game changers, the ones that are being seriously debated right now that have the biggest potential to affect your benefits.
You can really boil all this legislative chaos down to three main ideas, three big goals. The first one is the most straightforward, just putting more money directly into your pocket each month. The second is all about fixing old, frankly ancient rules that actually penalize you for trying to save money. And the third is a really popular one, the idea of making your benefits completely tax-free.
Okay, so let's tackle that first category, boosting your check. The biggest and most direct proposal here is called the Social Security Expansion Act. The concept is incredibly simple. The headline is a $200 per month increase for every single beneficiary. That works out to an extra $2,400 a year. But the bill actually goes further. It also wants to change how the annual cost of living adjustments are calculated, switching to something called the CPIE, which is an inflation index specifically for seniors, designed to be more accurate about their real costs.
Now, beyond those direct payment increases, there's a huge focus on modernizing supplemental security income, or SSI, and this is absolutely essential for the 8 million Americans who rely on it. And one of the biggest, most frustrating problems with the program is what's known as the savings penalty. And it's exactly what it sounds like. The rules are so out of date that they literally punish people for trying to save a little money for an emergency, effectively trapping them in a cycle of poverty.
You want to know how outdated we're talking about? The current limit on how much an individual can have in savings is just $2,000. That limit was set in 1984. It has never once been updated for inflation. Think about that. So if your car breaks down or you have an unexpected medical bill, you're just stuck.
Well, a bipartisan proposal called the SSI Savings Penalty Elimination Act wants to fix this. It would raise that limit all the way to $20,000. That's a game changer. It's not about getting rich. It's about giving people the dignity to handle one of life's emergencies without losing their lifeline.
So when it comes to reforming SSI, there are really two different schools of thought moving through Congress right now. The first one, that bipartisan bill we just talked about, is laser-focused on fixing the savings problem, on letting people build a small safety net. But there's a second, more ambitious approach called the SSI Restoration Act. This bill has a different focus. It says, let's not just tweak the rules, let's radically increase the monthly payment itself, with the goal of lifting recipients well above the federal poverty line once and for all.
And that brings us to our third big category of reform, taxes. You know, it catches a lot of people by surprise when they retire, the fact that your Social Security benefits can actually be taxed by the federal government. Well, there's a proposal with a fantastic name, the You Earn It, You Keep It Act, that aims to put a stop to that. The philosophy behind it is just simple common sense. You paid into the system your entire working life, so you shouldn't have to pay taxes on it again when you finally get your benefits back.
So how would it actually work? Well, it's a pretty straightforward two-part plan. Part 1, it would completely eliminate all federal taxes on Social Security benefits, period. For millions of seniors, that's an immediate direct increase in their net income. But of course, that has to be paid for. So Part 2 is the funding mechanism. Right now, there's a cap on how much of your income is subject to the Social Security payroll tax. This bill would apply that tax to all earnings over $250,000, making sure higher earners contribute more to keep the system solvent for decades to come.
Okay, we've gone through the past wins and we've walked through the major proposals on the table. Now for the part I know you've been waiting for, the bottom line. What could this all mean for your monthly check? Let's put some actual numbers to these ideas and visualize the potential impact.
So take a look at this. For the average Social Security retiree, the impact would be huge. The current average benefit is just under $2,000 a month. If these major proposals were to become law, you could see that jump up past $2,500. That's a potential increase of anywhere from 17 to 27%. This isn't just a tiny cost of living adjustment. This is a substantial, meaningful difference in your monthly income.
And if you think that's a big deal, look at what could happen for SSI recipients. This is where it goes from a significant increase to a complete, life-altering transformation. The current maximum federal benefit is just below $1,000 a month. Well, the SSI Restoration Act aims to push that up to over $1,750. We are talking about nearly doubling the benefit. This would fundamentally change the program from one of just barely surviving to one of actual stability and dignity.
Okay, so those numbers are really exciting, but we have to be realistic. Potential is one thing. The political reality in Washington is another thing entirely. The truth is, not all of these proposals have the same odds. Some of those common-sense bipartisan reforms, like fixing the SSI savings rules, they have a really high likelihood of passage. But the most ambitious bills, like a massive expansion of all benefits, they face a much tougher, uphill political battle. What this probably means is that we'll see progress happen incrementally, piece by piece, rather than one giant bill that changes everything all at once.
So we've covered the laws that have passed, the proposals on the table, and the potential impact on your wallet. Where do we go from here? In this final section, we're going to look ahead and give you the key dates and events you need to watch as this historic debate continues to unfold.
So when you step back and look at the whole picture, we are in this fascinating and honestly very rare moment. On one hand, you have real bipartisan agreement on modernizing some of the most outdated parts of these programs. But on the other hand, you have these deep, fundamental divides on how far we should go with a broader benefit expansion. The potential for transformative change is absolutely real, but so are the political hurdles. And so the crucial question for millions of Americans remains, which one of these potential futures will become our reality?
Hey everyone, if you get Social Security, SSI, or VA benefits, I bet you've been hearing a lot of chatter lately about big plans to boost your payments. And let me tell you, it is way more than just talk. Right now, we are seeing a wave of new laws being proposed like we have never seen before, all aimed at putting more money in your pocket. And I'm not kidding about that number. We've counted over 80, yes, 80 different bills and proposals floating around Washington right now. From tiny little adjustments to massive system-wide overhauls, the sheer number of ideas being kicked around is just incredible. Honestly, there's more action on this front than we've seen in a very, very long time. So with all that noise, how do you figure out what's real? Which of these 80-plus ideas are serious and which are just, well, political noise?
Which ones actually have a fighting chance of becoming law, and what would they really mean for your monthly check? That is exactly what we are going to break down today. We're going to cut through all the static and find the signal. So, here's how we're going to tackle this. First up, we'll dig into the big proposals that would affect pretty much every single person on Social Security. Then, we're going to pivot to some really huge, potentially life-changing ideas for supplemental security income, or SSI. After that, we'll cover what's new for our nation's veterans. And finally, and this is super important, we'll do a reality check on which of these plans have the best shot at actually happening. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so we're starting with the big one, Social Security. These next few proposals are the real heavy hitters. We're talking about the ones that aim for huge, sweeping changes that would touch the lives of tens of millions of people. These are some of the boldest visions out there for the future of the program. So let's kick things off with probably the most ambitious plan on the whole list, the Social Security Expansion Act. The main idea here is super straightforward, a $2,400 a year raise for every single person getting benefits. That works out to an extra $200 in your check every single month. And notice, it's not a percentage, it's a flat dollar amount. That means it's designed to give a major lift to everyone, especially folks with lower monthly benefits. And this quote right here, from the bill's biggest champion, Senator Bernie Sanders, really gets to the heart of it. The philosophy is simple. With costs going up for everybody, the answer isn't to trim benefits, it's to make them stronger. And the bill also pays for it by making sure that all income over $250,000 a year gets taxed for Social Security, asking the wealthiest Americans to chip in more.
Now for a different take, we've got the Social Security 2100 Act. This has been a long-term project for Congressman John Larson. Its big headline is an immediate 2% benefit increase for everybody. And just to put that into perspective, if that passed, it would be the first time Congress has passed a law for an across-the-board raise in over 50 years. But wait, there's more. It also adds another 5% bump for people who've been getting benefits for 15 years or more, recognizing that folks who've been retired longer often face the toughest financial squeeze.
Okay, this next one comes at the problem from a totally different direction, taxes. A lot of people don't realize that depending on your total income, up to 85% of your Social Security benefits can actually be taxed by the federal government. Well, the You Earn It, You Keep It Act would get rid of that completely. It would eliminate all federal taxes on Social Security benefits, period. For millions of retirees, this would mean a direct boost in their take-home pay. We're talking hundreds, maybe even thousands of dollars a year back in their pockets.
Now, before we go any further, there's this one term you gotta know, CPIE. You'll see it pop up in a ton of these bills. It stands for the Consumer Price Index for the Elderly. See, right now, the annual cost of living adjustment, the COLA, is based on how working people spend their money. But seniors have totally different costs, right? A much bigger chunk of their budget goes to things like healthcare, and those costs are rising way faster than everything else. The CPIE is a new formula designed to track those specific costs, which advocates say would give seniors a bigger, more accurate COLA every year. All right, let's switch gears now and talk about the Supplemental Security Income Program, SSI. This is a critical lifeline for about 8 million low-income seniors and people with disabilities. And honestly, while those Social Security plans are big, some of the most profound, truly life-altering proposals being talked about are happening right here with SSI.
I mean, just look at this. To really get what's going on with SSI, you have to see how ridiculously out of date the rules are. Right now, to get SSI, you can't have more than $2,000 in assets. That limit has not been updated since 1984. No joke. It basically punishes people for saving. You can't put away money for a car repair or a medical emergency without risking your benefits. So the SSI Savings Penalty Elimination Act would finally bring this into the modern age, raising the limit to $20,000 for individuals and $10,000 for couples. This would be a game changer, letting people save for the future without fear.
And you know what makes this bill a really serious contender? It has support from everywhere. This isn't a Democrat or Republican thing at all. It's just seen as a common sense fix. It's got sponsors from both parties, and it's backed by everyone from disability groups to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. When you've got Microsoft and JP Morgan Chase agreeing with advocates, you know you have a real shot at getting something done. Now, as big as updating the asset limits is, the SSI Restoration Act is aiming for something even bigger. Just look at this chart. That first bar, that's the current maximum SSI benefit, around $967 a month. Now look at that second bar. That's what this act wants to do. Bring the benefit up to around $1,752. The goal is to raise the benefit to 100% of the federal poverty line to make sure that no one who relies on SSI has to live in poverty. This would nearly double the income for millions of America's most vulnerable people.
Okay, next up, let's talk about our nation's veterans. When it comes to VA benefits, the conversation is often about making sure the system is reliable, fair, and truly honors their service. And the proposals we're seeing really reflect that, from the annual cost of living increases to some much-needed fixes to the system itself.
There are a bunch of other important bills trying to fix problems in the VA system. For instance, the Review Every Veterans Claim Act would stop the VA from just denying a claim because a veteran missed one medical exam. There's another one to make the appeals process easier for family caregivers, and it's important to see that progress is happening. The Elizabeth Dole Act was just signed into law, and it's already expanding support for those very caregivers and modernizing VA services. All right, we have talked about some huge, really exciting ideas. An extra $200 a month, doubling SSI benefits, no more taxes on Social Security, but now it's time for the big reality check. Which of these ideas could actually go from being a bill to being actual law? This little table really tells the story. Up top, with a high chance of passing, you've got the annual Veterans COLA and that SSI Savings Penalty Elimination Act. Why? Simple. They're bipartisan. They have support from both sides, and they're seen as common sense fixes, not radical changes. Then you get to something like the Social Security 2100 Act, with a moderate chance. It's got some things Republicans might like, but it's still a big, complex package. And then, at the bottom, with a low chance, you have that massive Social Security Expansion Act. It's popular, for sure, but the plan to pay for it by raising taxes on high earners faces a ton of political opposition, making it a very tough sell in a divided Washington.
So if you're trying to figure out what to really keep an eye on heading into 2026, this is your list. The VA COLA, it's pretty much a sure thing. The SSI Savings Penalty Bill, it has so much momentum. Those bills to make the VA system work better are also really strong contenders. And finally, that idea of getting rid of federal taxes on Social Security benefits is gaining a lot of steam and could be a major focus.
And really, that's the bottom line here. The dream of a huge $200 a month raise is fantastic, and it keeps the conversation moving forward. But the most realistic path to actually getting more money in your pocket, at least in the near term, comes from these practical, bipartisan efforts to just update old broken rules, like those SSI asset limits from 1984, and to make sure those yearly increases are fair. Real progress is happening, even if it feels a little slow sometimes.
So we'll leave you with this to think about. We've gone over a lot, from a flat $200 raise to being able to finally save $20,000 on SSI to not having your benefits taxed at all anymore. Each of these could change lives in really different ways. So for your own situation, which one of these ideas would make the biggest difference for you and your family? It's something to think about as this debate continues.
So are we getting another stimulus check? Come on, it's the question that's on everybody's mind, right? Especially if you're on a fixed income. But what if I told you the answer isn't buried in politics? It's actually hidden in plain sight, in the economic data. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and find the one key trigger that actually makes these checks a reality. This is the big one. It's the question we're all asking. After everything we've been through, it just feels like everyone is wondering when, or even if, more help is ever going to be on the way. Well, instead of just guessing, we're going to look at the exact same signals the people in charge are watching. It's time to see what might really be coming over the horizon.
Okay, so before we can look ahead, we have to get one really important thing straight. And, it might not be what you want to hear, but believe me, understanding this is the absolute most critical piece of the entire puzzle.
And here it is. The bottom line is, it doesn't matter how many petitions get signed or how loudly people demand more help, none of that directly triggers a stimulus check. The one thing, the only thing that acts as the catalyst is the health of the U.S. economy. Period.
Now look, I know that might sound a little discouraging at first, but it's actually the complete opposite. It's empowering. It means we can stop getting caught up in all the political noise and start looking at the real data, the same stuff the policymakers are looking at. It changes everything from just, hoping for help to actually understanding the conditions that make that help necessary.
So, if it's all about the economy, what are those conditions? What should we be looking for? Well, this brings us right to the heart of what we're talking about today. The economic trigger. Let's break down exactly how this thing works.
The key idea here is something called an inverse correlation. Now, don't let the fancy term fool you. It's actually super simple. Just think of a seesaw, right? When one side goes up, the other side has to go down. It's the same here. When the health of the economy goes down, the chances of the government sending out stimulus checks goes up. They move in opposite directions. Simple as that.
Think about it. When the economy is just humming along, jobs are everywhere, businesses are growing, there's basically zero chance of stimulus. And why would there be?
You don't need to stimulate an economy that's already running hot. But when things start to slow down, when the economy looks like it's heading for a recession, that's when the whole conversation in Washington completely changes.
So what exactly should you be watching for? Well, here are the big 4 signals. First, rising unemployment claims. That's a big one. When more people are losing their jobs, it's a clear sign of trouble. Then you've got slowing growth and contracting business activity, which just means companies are making less and selling less. But honestly, the real flashing red light to watch for is the Federal Reserve. When they start cutting interest rates, you need to pay attention. They only do that when they see big trouble on the horizon and want to make it cheaper to borrow money to get things going again. These are the headlines that truly matter.
And look, this isn't just some theory somebody came up with. The data shows a crystal clear, repeating pattern throughout recent American history. It's kind of undeniable once you see it.
Let that sink in for a second. Every single major recession in the modern era has led to stimulus checks. That tells us that these payments aren't random acts of kindness. They're a standard, almost predictable response to a specific crisis, a major economic downturn. The playbook is there, and they've used it again and again.
Let's just walk through it. Back in 2001, the dot-com bubble burst, and we had a recession. The response? $300 checks. Okay. 7 years later, 2008, the housing market completely collapses, triggering a massive global crisis. The response? $600 checks. Then, of course, 2020, the pandemic shuts down the entire world. The response? $1,200 checks. Are you seeing the pattern here? A major recession hits, and boom, payments go out. It has happened every single time.
But hold on, because if we look just a little bit closer at those numbers, something even more interesting and kind of wild starts to pop out. It's not just that they sent checks, it's the amount of money that tells a whole other story.
Okay, so the first time, in 2001, the baseline was set, $300.
Then in 2008, when the next big crisis hit, what happened? The amount exactly doubled to $600.
And in 2020, you already know where this is going, it doubled again to $1,200. I mean, come on, that's not a coincidence. That is a clear mathematical pattern playing out over 2 decades. Each payment was literally double the one that came before it.
All right, so now we're armed with the 2 biggest clues. We know about the economic trigger, and we've seen this incredible historical pattern. So what can we reasonably guess about what might be coming next?
This is the million-dollar question, isn't it? If we were to face another major recession in the near future, would the people in charge stick to this exact same doubling pattern that's held true for more than 20 years?
Well, if you just follow the math to its next logical step, you double $1,200 and you get $2,400. Now, let's be crystal clear about this. This is not a prediction. It's just pointing out a very curious historical trend. But it is a fascinating pattern to think about, isn't it?
All of this really leads to one powerful, simple takeaway. If you want to have a real idea of what's coming, you can pretty much ignore the political shouting matches. The real answers are in the jobs reports, the GDP numbers, and what the Federal Reserve is doing. You now know exactly what to look for. The real signs that history shows us come right before these payments.
And here's one final crucial warning. When these things happen, they happen fast. I mean, think back to early 2020. In February, everything seemed pretty normal. By March, the entire world had changed. And by April, checks were already on their way. The shift from a stable economy to a crisis can happen in just a few weeks. When the dominoes start to fall, they fall quickly.
So, when you put it all together, history seems to show us that a major stimulus payment isn't really a question of if, but a question of when a recession forces the government's hand. The focus shifts away from waiting for politicians to make an announcement and toward watching the economy itself. So the real question I have for you is, now that you know what to look for, what economic signs will you be watching?
You know, there's a question that just keeps popping up, and I see it everywhere. Are we going to get a 4th stimulus check? It's a huge topic online, and honestly, for very good reason. So today, we're going to cut through all that noise and really look at what the economy itself is telling us. So let's just get right to it. This is the question on everybody's mind. And listen, while there's tons of speculation out there, the real answer isn't buried in some political headline. Nope. It's found in the economic data. And that's not an exaggeration. We're talking about this today because for millions of people who are really feeling the financial squeeze, this isn't just some abstract idea. It's a very real daily concern. So let's try to get some real clarity. All right, here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with what actually triggers these payments. Then we'll look at a pretty surprising pattern from the past. After that, we'll zero in on the one economic number you need to keep an eye on. And finally, we'll talk about why the next stimulus might look totally different from the last one. Okay, first things first. What actually causes a stimulus check to happen in the first place? It's not random, and it's not just politics. It is a direct, calculated response to one specific event, an economy that's gotten sick. And when we say the economy is sick, we're really talking about a recession. That's the official word for it, right? A major, widespread, and kind of prolonged downturn that hits everything and everyone, from big corporations to your local coffee shop. And this right here is the core idea we need to understand. If you just look back at the last couple of decades, the pattern is crystal clear. Every single major recession has been followed by stimulus checks. Every single time. It's basically become a standard move in the modern economic playbook. Here's a great way to think about it. Imagine the economy is a patient. A recession? That's when the patient gets seriously ill. The lawmakers are the doctors, and their go-to prescription is a big old injection of cash. That's the stimulus, to try and get the patient back up and running. And it makes sense, right? The sicker the patient, the bigger the dose of medicine they're going to need. So let's dig into that history a little bit, because when you actually examine the numbers from past recessions, well, a really fascinating and maybe even predictive pattern starts to show up. Okay, check this out. Back in 2001, after the dot-com bubble burst, the check was for $300. Then in 2008, during that massive financial crisis, it doubled to $600. And then in 2020, with the pandemic, it doubled again to $1,200. Are you seeing the pattern here? Now, if you just follow that doubling logic, the next number in that sequence would be around $2,400. But, and I have to be super clear about this is just an observation of a historical trend. It is absolutely not a guarantee. The actual amount of any future check would depend completely on how severe the economic downturn is at the time. So if a sick economy is the trigger, how do we know when it's sick enough for the doctors to step in? Well, there's one key health report that we can all look at. It comes out on the first Friday of every single month, and it's simply called the Jobs Report. And inside this report, there are a few vital signs. You've got the headline number, the unemployment rate. But just as important is jobs created or lost. Are companies hiring, or are they laying people off? The labor participation rate tells us how many people are even trying to find a job, and average hourly earnings shows if our paychecks are keeping pace with inflation. Altogether, they paint a pretty clear picture of our economic health. So when you start to see that businesses, from the giant corporations all the way down to your local pizzeria, are slowing down their hiring, or worse, starting to let people go, that is a massive warning flare for the whole economy. It means people aren't spending as much, companies are getting nervous, and the whole economic engine is starting to sputter. That is the signal that gets lawmakers to scramble and start seriously talking about what they need to do. But, and this is really important, if they do act again, there's a good chance it won't be a carbon copy of last time. The whole strategy could shift to something much more targeted. See, the last few checks were broad. They went out to a massive chunk of the population. A targeted strategy is different. It would focus laser-like on low-income and fixed-income households. Why? Because those are the folks most likely to spend the money immediately and pump it right back into the economy. This gives you way more bang for your buck, and it does it with less risk of driving up inflation for everybody else. So the big takeaway here is this. We might need to adjust our expectations. If and when another stimulus package comes along, it could be designed very, very differently. Maybe aimed at a smaller group of people to get the maximum economic impact with the fewest negative side effects. Okay, so let's just trace that path one more time. It starts with an economic contraction. We see it in those bad jobs reports. That triggers the lawmakers' scramble, where they have to respond. Then a stimulus package is passed, and finally, the payments are distributed with one single goal: to get spent right away and kickstart the economy. So that brings us to the final thought. Based on modern history, it really doesn't seem to be a matter of if the government will intervene in the next major recession. The real question is, how sick does the economy have to get before they open up that playbook once again? That's what we'll all be watching.
You know, remember those stimulus checks we all got a few years back? For some people, they were an absolute lifeline. For others, well, they were a nice little bonus. A really fascinating new study is asking a powerful question. What if we could have gotten a much, much bigger economic boost, but for a fraction of the cost? The answer, it turns out, lies in getting the money to the right people and doing it in a totally different way. So let's break down this idea for what might just be a smarter stimulus.
Okay, so let's get right to the heart of it. The proposal this study makes is for a recurring $2,000 monthly check. But wait, this isn't some money for everyone idea. Not at all. The entire strategy really hinges on who gets this check, and the data suggests that being super precise is the key to making it all work. So to really get to the bottom of this, we're going to walk through 4 key parts. First, we'll look back at the stimulus dilemma from 2020 and 2021. Then, we'll uncover a key economic clue that is absolutely central to this new idea. After that, we'll compare the economic impact of spenders versus savers. And finally, we'll explore all the details of this proposal for a smarter stimulus.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the stimulus dilemma. You know, to figure out where we might be going, we first have to really understand where we've been. So let's take a look back at the lessons we learned from that last big round of stimulus payments.
So between 2020 and 2021, the government pushed out 3 big waves of stimulus checks, and the total price tag? A pretty staggering $850 billion. I mean, that's more than the entire economy of some countries. The whole goal was to jumpstart our economy, but a price tag that big raises a really important question. Did that money actually get spent in the right places, or did we kind of miss the mark?
Well, here were the core problems with that old approach. The checks went out to about 85% of the population. That means a huge chunk of that money went to people who, frankly, didn't really need it for their immediate expenses. Economists have a name for this. They call it the helicopter approach, just kind of dumping money across the landscape and hoping for the best. And the result? Well, not only was it super inefficient, but some studies suggest it added about 3 percentage points to the inflation that came later. There just had to be a better way.
And that leads us right into our second section, a key economic clue. See, researchers who are analyzing all this data found a secret to making stimulus way more effective. And it all comes down to understanding one simple but really powerful economic principle.
That principle is called the marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. Now, don't let the name fool you. It sounds really academic, but it's an incredibly simple idea. It just measures one thing. When you get an extra dollar, how much of it do you actually spend and how much do you save? That's the whole concept right there. Let's just boil it all the way down. Forget the jargon for a second. NPC is really just asking this one simple question. How likely are you to spend the next dollar you get? That's it. And this simple question, it turns out, is the key to unlocking a much more effective stimulus strategy.
So this concept basically creates 2 very distinct groups of people. You've got folks with a high MPC. They're typically on lower incomes, so an extra dollar is very likely to be spent immediately on necessities. Then you have people with a low MPC. They're usually on higher incomes, so that extra dollar is way more likely to be saved or invested. Simply put, the less of a financial cushion you have, the more likely you are to spend new money right away. And that distinction, well, it changes everything.
Okay, so let's move on to Section 3 and see how this all connects. Spenders versus savers. Now that we understand what MPC is, let's actually apply it. Let's follow the money and see what happens when we give the same amount of cash to people on opposite ends of that spectrum. Let's use that core member from the study, $2,000. Now, imagine 2 of these checks are sent out. One goes to a spender, someone with a high MPC. The other one goes to a saver, someone with a low MPC. The amount of money is exactly the same, but where it goes next tells 2 completely different stories about the economy.
The data for the person with the high MPC is pretty striking. When this person gets that $2,000, the vast majority of it, about $1,600, is spent within just 10 days. The rest of it, gone within a month. This means the entire amount gets injected directly back into the economy, buying groceries, paying rent, supporting local businesses. This is stimulus in its absolute purest form.
And you know, this is the perfect time for a little reality check. The whole purpose of a stimulus check is right there in the name, to stimulate. It's not designed to be a savings plan or a debt reduction tool. Its only job is to get money moving through the economy to keep everything going. Spending isn't a side effect of the program, it's the entire point.
So what happens when that same $2,000 check goes to a person with a low MPC, the saver? Well, the study found that they generally don't spend much of it at all. That money gets saved, or invested, or used to pay down a mortgage. From an economic stimulus perspective, that money is effectively taken right out of circulation. The source uses this great analogy. It's hoarded like a bunch of squirrels saving away nuts for the winter. And while saving is an amazing personal habit, it totally defeats the purpose of an economic stimulus.
So the crucial point is this. When the whole goal is to kickstart the economy, the government isn't looking for savers. It's looking for spenders. It needs people who will take that money and immediately put it right back into the system. And this is why that distinction between high and low MPC isn't just some academic theory. It's the absolute key to making a program like this work.
And this brings us to our final section, a smarter stimulus. Based on everything we've just laid out, the study proposes a completely different, much more targeted approach for the next time a major economic downturn happens.
So here's the proposed model. Step 1, instead of that blanket helicopter approach, you surgically identify only the high MPC individuals. Step 2, you replace the one-off check with a sustained monthly payment. And the result is this amazing 1-2 punch. You get way more economic stimulation for every single dollar you spend, and you avoid that massive $850 billion price tag of the old method.
The benefits of this kind of model are really clear. The money goes directly to the people who need it the most and who will actually go out and spend it. This gives you a much bigger economic bang for your buck at a fraction of the total cost. And maybe the biggest shift here is moving from that one-time payment to sustained support, replacing what one person called a payment that was cool for 3 minutes with a predictable lifeline that can last for months.
So this all brings us to the final question. This model suggests we can have a stimulus that is cheaper, more effective, and much more targeted to the people who need help. It's a really powerful idea, and it's backed by a lot of data. The real question is, when the next economic crisis hits, will policymakers stick with that old helicopter approach, or will they be willing to embrace a smarter, more precise strategy? What we learned from the last crisis might just be the key to navigating the next one.
You've probably seen the headlines buzzing around. Something about a new payment for Social Security recipients? Well, we're going to break down exactly what that's all about. It's a proposal that's getting a ton of attention, and we need to talk about what it could actually mean for millions of people. Okay, let's get right into it.
Okay, so the number at the absolute center of this whole conversation is this, $1,400. And look, this isn't just some random figure pulled out of a hat. It is the exact amount at the heart of a new proposal aimed squarely at people on Social Security.
So what is this really? Well, there's a pretty influential advocacy group called the Senior Citizens League, and they're the ones pushing for what they call a one-time catch-up payment. Now, the key thing to understand right away is that this is not a permanent monthly increase. Nope. It's designed as a special, one-shot payment to give folks some immediate relief.
But that leads to the big question, right? Why now? I mean, a proposal for a payment this big, it doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's pointing to a much, much deeper problem that advocates say has been brewing for years. So let's dig into the why behind this whole thing.
And really, the entire argument. It all comes down to one thing: the cost of living gap. Basically, there's this growing sense that the money seniors are getting just isn't keeping up with what things actually cost day to day. And that gap is getting dangerous.
So to really get a handle on this gap, we've got to talk about COLA, the cost of living adjustment. It's that annual raise that Social Security recipients get. And its whole job, its only job, is to make sure your benefits can buy the same amount of stuff this year as they did last year, even when prices go up. On paper, it's supposed to be a perfect system.
But in the real world, is it working? Well, according to people like Shannon Benton from the Senior Citizens League, the answer is a big no. She talks about a sharp erosion in what people can actually buy. She's arguing that those yearly COLA raises just aren't keeping up with the soaring costs of essentials. We're talking food, housing, and a big one, healthcare. And listen, this gap is a huge deal because of just how much people depend on these benefits. I mean, look at this. For almost 40% of folks, Social Security isn't just some of their income, it's all of it. It's their entire income. So for that group, when the COLA doesn't cut it, there's literally no other safety net. That's it.
Okay, so if we all agree the COLA isn't quite doing its job, the obvious next question is why? What's broken? And that question takes us right into the really technical, nerdy heart of this whole debate. It's all about a disagreement over the formula, the math used to figure out inflation for seniors.
Let's break this down, because it can get a little confusing. Right now, the COLA is calculated using something called the CPIW. Now, this index looks at what urban workers are buying. Things like gas for the commute, new clothes for the office. But here's the problem. Advocates say seniors spend their money completely differently. They spend way less on gas and way, way more on things like healthcare. So they want to switch to a different index, the CPIE, which is specifically designed to track spending for the elderly. It gives a lot more weight to those crucial costs.
And you might be thinking, is this just some niche idea? Not even close. When the Senior Citizens League actually surveyed retirees, the support for this change was just overwhelming. I mean, look at that number. A staggering 96% of the people they asked said, yes,
The COLA should absolutely be based on how we actually spend our money.
And the numbers behind that feeling are pretty grim. You've got 1 in 5 seniors spending over $1,000 a month just on healthcare alone. 4 out of 5 feel like the official inflation numbers are a joke and don't match what they see at the grocery store. And then there's this. 13% of seniors are trying to get by on less than $1,000 a month. That's often below the poverty line. It's a tough reality.
So this idea of a one-time payment, it might sound kind of radical, right? But if you look back at our history, it's actually not a completely new concept. This whole conversation is really just the latest chapter in a long story of adjusting benefits when times get tough economically.
Yeah, I mean, this idea definitely builds on stuff we've seen before. Remember the Great Recession back in 2009? Social Security recipients got $250 checks then. And just a few years ago, there was a big push for a $200 a month increase. And of course, we all remember the stimulus checks, the economic impact payments during the pandemic. So you see, the idea of sending targeted direct cash, it's been done.
So history shows us it's possible, right? The government can step in and send direct help when things get bad. But, and this is a big but, it's really important to remember that just because it happened before doesn't mean it'll happen again. Every single proposal, including this one, has to fight its own battle through the current political and economic climate.
Okay, so we've covered the what, the $1,400 payment, we've covered the why, the COLA gap, and we've looked at the history. Now let's pull it all together. Where does this proposal actually stand today? And, let's be honest, what are its chances of happening?
You really have to understand how something like this becomes a reality. It's a journey. Right now, we are at the very beginning, steps 1 and 2. You have an advocacy group making a suggestion, and the media is talking about it. That's great. But for this to turn into actual money in someone's bank account, it needs to become a bill. That bill has to pass the House, and it has to pass the Senate. Then it has to be signed by the president. That is a very, very long and tricky road.
All right, so let's boil this whole thing down. What are the most important things to remember? Number 1, and this is the big one, this is just a proposal. It is not a law. Number 2, it's designed for all Social Security recipients. That means retirement, SSI, and SSDI. 3, the whole argument is that the current COLA formula is broken because it doesn't reflect what seniors actually spend money on. And finally, number 4, the fix they're suggesting has 2 parts. Change the formula for the future and give everyone a one-time payment to make up for the past. That's the whole shebang. And all of this really leaves us with a much bigger, more fundamental question to think about. I mean, this whole $1,400 idea, it's just one possible answer to a huge challenge. As our economy keeps changing and the cost of everything keeps changing, how do we make sure our most important safety nets, things like Social Security, are changing right along with it? That's the real conversation, and it's one we're definitely going to be having for a long, long time.
You know, if you try to keep up with the news about Social Security, wow, it's a lot. One minute you hear about benefit cuts, and the next it's all about increases. It can make your head spin, right? So in this explainer, we're going to slice through all that confusion. We'll get right to the facts, separating what's actually happening right now from what's just being proposed for the future.
All right, let's just ask the big question right up front. Is Social Security sending you more money? Well, the answer's a little complicated. For some people, yes, and for others, it's still a big debate. There's one major change that's already law and has led to significant payouts for a specific group of people. For everyone else, there are other big ideas on the table. Our goal today is to show you exactly what's what.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. Now we're looking ahead to what's on the horizon. Let's dive into some other big legislative proposals that could mean more money for a lot more people down the road.
Right now, there are really 2 big ideas floating around for a future raise. On one side, you have the Social Security Expansion Act, a proposal from Senator Bernie Sanders. It's pretty straightforward. Give everybody on Social Security an extra $200 a month, and to pay for it, raise taxes on the highest earners. On the other side is a more targeted approach. The idea here is to send those extra checks only to the lowest income beneficiaries. The theory is that they're the most likely to spend that money right away, giving the economy a more immediate jolt.
And just to put that first idea into real numbers, an extra $200 a month comes out to $2,400 a year. That would be a serious increase for every single person receiving benefits. But, and it's so important to remember this is still just a proposal. It has not been passed into law.
Okay, let's shift gears completely. There's a whole other vision for how to improve Social Security, and this one has nothing to do with passing new laws for benefit raises. Instead, it's all about making the system stronger from the inside out through better management and different tax policies.
And you can really see this viewpoint summed up in this quote from former President Donald Trump. He says, "I signed one big, beautiful bill and allowed no tax on Social Security for our great seniors." So for this approach, the key isn't necessarily bigger checks from the government, but letting seniors keep more of the money they already have by cutting taxes on their benefits.
So, wow, we've covered a lot of ground and some very different ideas for what's next. Let's try to pull this all together and figure out, what does this all mean for the future of your benefits?
Okay, so when you boil it all down, there are really three distinct paths we've looked at. First, you have the Fairness Act. The status on that one is confirmed law, and it's already providing back pay and raises for that specific group affected by WEP and GPO. Then you have the two big future ideas. There's the legislative path, passing new laws to raise monthly checks for lots of people, and then there's the administrative vision, which is all about strengthening the system from within through efficiency and tax cuts.
And really, that brings us to the ultimate question, doesn't it? Bigger checks versus a stronger system. What's the right path forward? Should the main goal be getting more money into people's pockets every month to deal with the rising cost of living? Or should the priority be on creating a more efficient, streamlined, and fiscally sound system for the long haul? There's no easy answer, but whatever we decide will define the future of Social Security for tens of millions of Americans.
Today, we are really getting into the weeds on the future of supplemental security income, SSI. There are some huge proposals out there that could completely change the game for millions of people. We're talking bigger monthly checks and a massive jump in how much you're allowed to save. But when you peel back all the layers, all these proposals really come down to one single critical question. Is SSI, as it stands today, actually keeping up with the cost of living? This is the core problem we're going to unpack, because for almost 8 million people, the answer to that question really dictates their entire life. So let's just step back for a second. SSI was created, over 50 years ago, and it had a super clear mission: to be a financial safety net. It was designed to fight poverty, and for a while, it did its job. But over the years, a gap started to appear, and that gap has just kept growing, leaving the whole program and the people who rely on it falling further and further behind.
Okay, so just to make sure we're all on the same page, what exactly is SSI? It's a really important federal program run by the Social Security Administration that gives a monthly income to adults and kids with disabilities, and also to folks 65 and older who have very little in terms of income and resources. And this right here is the absolute key to its original design. The whole idea from day one was that the payments would keep people right at the federal poverty line. Not way above it, sure, but definitely not below it. It was supposed to be a floor, a baseline of financial stability. And remembering that original goal is so important for understanding where things are today.
So this idea of falling behind, it isn't just a feeling. It's not a hunch that things are getting tougher. It is a measurable, quantifiable gap. And the numbers, they tell a really, really clear story about the difference between the program's original promise and today's reality.
Okay, let's start with the benchmark. For 2025, the official federal poverty line for one person is $15,650 a year. But nobody pays their rent once a year, right? So let's break that down by month. That comes out to $1,304. Remember that number. It's our baseline. Now let's look at what's actually happening for someone on SSI. The absolute maximum federal payment a single person can get in 2025 is $967 a month. That's the ceiling. You can't get $1 more from the federal government. So right off the bat, you can see those two numbers are not the same. And when you put those two numbers right next to each other, like in this chart, wow, the gap just jumps right out at you. It's not even close. The maximum benefit falls way short of that poverty line, and this difference has just been getting worse year after year. So do the math. The difference is $337. That's the hole people find themselves in every single month. To put it another way, the maximum SSI check is nearly 35% below the very poverty line it was created to meet. That is a massive gap to cover when you're on a fixed income. Okay, so that's the problem. It's a big one. But how do you fix it? Well, there are some pretty concrete plans being floated around. And maybe the biggest one is a piece of legislation called the SSI Restoration Act. It's designed to attack that income shortfall we just talked about head on. And this proposal is getting a lot of attention.
In the source material we looked at, one analyst put it pretty bluntly, saying the SSI Restoration Act, in my opinion, is a really, really good one. It checks literally all the boxes. So it's seen as this complete fix, not just some tiny little patch.
So what are these boxes that it checks? Well, first and foremost, the Act wants to raise monthly benefits to 100% of the federal poverty line. That means, boom, an instant $337 a month raise for someone getting the max benefit. And this part is crucial. It would then tie or index those benefits so they automatically go up with the poverty line every year. That way, this gap can never open up again. The Act also tackles the marriage penalty, which can hurt married couples, and it wants to seriously raise those ancient asset limits, which we're going to talk about next.
Okay, reality check time. This is really, really important to understand. The SSI Restoration Act is still just a proposal. Right now, it has not been passed by Congress. It's been introduced, it's being talked about, but it is not the law of the land.
But, a bigger check is only half the story. There's another huge problem that's kind of baked into the system right now, and it has everything to do with saving money. Okay, so the asset limits for SSI, that's how much money you can have saved up, are stuck in a time warp. They haven't been updated in decades. Right now, the limit for one person is just $2,000. I mean, think about that. Your car breaks down, your fridge dies, you have one unexpected medical bill, that can wipe you out completely. It basically makes it impossible to build any kind of real safety net.
So the proposed fix for this is, well, it's dramatic. The asset limit for an individual would jump from $2,000 all the way up to $10,000. And for a couple, it would go from $3,000 to $20,000. I mean, that is a night and day difference. Let's just pause on that individual number for a second. Going from $2,000 to $10,000, that's a 500% increase. We are not talking about a small tweak here. This is a massive shift in policy, basically admitting that the financial world of today is nothing like it was when these old limits were set. And what does that really mean for someone's life? It's not just about the numbers. It's about security. It's about having that peace of mind that comes from knowing you have a rainy day fund. It means you could actually save for an emergency without that constant fear of losing the very benefits you need to survive. Okay, so we've got these two huge ideas on the table, one to boost monthly income and one to raise the savings limit. But what does it all mean? How does a plan like this go from being an idea to being a reality?
Well, it all comes down to the process in Washington. First, lawmakers have to introduce the bills, which, yep, they've already done. After that, the bills have to get debated in committees and then eventually get voted on by both the House and the Senate. If, and that's a big if, a bill passes, then it goes to the Social Security Administration to actually put the changes into effect. But it's key to remember where we are right now. These are all still just proposals on paper.
All right, so let's just do a quick recap of the whole shebang. We're talking about 4 big things. 1, bigger checks, with that $337 monthly boost to get up to the poverty line. 2, higher savings with that 500% jump in the asset limit. 3, fairer rules, getting rid of that penalty for married couples. And 4, future-proofing the system by tying benefits to the poverty line so this whole mess never happens again. When you step back and look at it, these proposals are really a total rethinking of what SSI is and what it does. They're trying to bring it back to its original promise of being a real anti-poverty safety net. But the million-dollar question remains, is there enough political will to make these big plans a new reality for the millions of Americans who rely on it? And that's what we'll all be watching.
Okay, let's talk about a pretty wild idea. What if every single person on Social Security got the exact same check every month? I mean, not based on how much you earned during your career, but just one flat amount for everyone. It's a really radical proposal, and it's starting to get some serious attention because it would completely transform one of the country's most important programs. So let's dive in and really unpack what this is all about.
Right now, the system is the complete opposite of flat. It's all over the place. You've got some folks on one end getting as little as, say, $50 or $60 a month, and then on the other extreme, the maximum possible benefit is over $5,000. That is a gigantic gap, and it's really the core issue that's fueling this whole conversation.
So, before we can really get the logic behind this flat benefit idea, we've got to first understand this huge divide in the current system. It's kind of like a tale of two different programs.
And look, this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This disparity has very real, very human consequences. Right now, there are about 11 million seniors in the U.S. living below the federal poverty line, and a lot of them depend on Social Security. That one number alone just shows you how high the stakes are here.
Yeah, that maximum benefit, the one around $5,000, it gets a lot of attention. But the reality for most people, it's nowhere close to that. The average retirement benefit is actually just under $2,000. And if you're on disability, SSDI, the average is even lower, just a bit under $1,600. So this chart really shows you the vast majority of people are a long, long way from that top payment.
This quote from one of the sources we looked at just hits the nail on the head. It talks about this massive bifurcation. And that's exactly what it is, a system split in two, where some people are getting just a few dollars, while others are getting thousands. This is the problem the flat benefit idea is trying to solve.
So what's the big idea to fix this divide? Well, it's to completely flatten the whole system, to create one single universal benefit amount that every single qualified person would get every single month.
And the number that's being talked about is around $2,200 a month. Now, that number wasn't just picked out of a hat. It's what they've calculated as the equilibrium point, the spot where the high-end and low-end benefits would eventually meet in the middle.
So how would we even get there? I mean, you can't just flip a switch overnight. The whole idea is that it would be a gradual process. You'd be systematically raising the payments for people at the bottom, while at the same time, you're slowly lowering the payments for people at the very top until everybody eventually lands on that same flat number.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like a massive, complicated undertaking. So how would a change this huge actually work in practice? Let's get into the mechanics.
It really breaks down into about 4 main steps. First, you start to phase down those high-end benefits over several years. A really key part of this is step 2. You'd stop giving the annual cost of living adjustments, the COLAs, to the highest earners. Step 3, all the money you save from that gets rerouted. And finally, step 4, you use those funds to boost up all the low-end benefits until they hit that target equilibrium point.
Now, a really big piece of this whole debate is the timeline. How long would this take? Is it a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, maybe even 15 years or more? The source material shows there are different schools of thought on this. And it matters because the longer the timeline, the higher that final flat benefit is likely to be, just because of inflation and economic growth over time.
And there are a couple of different ways to actually bring those high-end benefits down. One idea is a simple annual deduction. You just trim their benefit by, say, 5% each year. The other, maybe a slightly gentler way to do it, is to just freeze their benefits by taking away their yearly COLA. That means their payment just wouldn't keep up with inflation anymore, and its real value would slowly decrease.
If a plan like this actually happened, it would be so much more than just a tweak to payment amounts. It would fundamentally change the entire purpose and identity of Social Security as we know it.
What this would do is basically turn Social Security into something that looks a lot like a guaranteed basic income, or GBI. And the idea behind a GBI is pretty simple. Everyone who qualifies gets the same recurring payment. It creates a true financial floor that no one can fall beneath.
And this really gets to the philosophical heart of the whole thing. It would shift Social Security from being an earned benefit, where what you get out is tied to what you put in, to a system of universal support, where you get the benefits simply because you're a qualified citizen or resident. It's a huge change in thinking.
The potential results here are pretty massive. I mean, on the one hand, a move like this could lift millions of seniors and people with disabilities out of poverty. It would give them a stable, predictable income. It would also make the super complex Social Security formulas way, way simpler. But maybe most importantly, it forces us all to have a conversation about what we want Social Security to be in the 21st century.
Let's just boil it all down and put these two systems side by side. Right now, your benefit is based on your earnings history. In the new proposal, it's based on just being a citizen or resident. The benefit amount goes from totally variable to completely flat, and the main goal of the program itself actually shifts from replacing your income to preventing poverty, period.
So when you get right down to it, this whole debate makes us ask a really fundamental question about one of our most important institutions. Should Social Security be an earned benefit that you're entitled to based on your work, or should it be a guaranteed safety net for absolutely everyone? How we answer that question will really define its future.
Today, we're jumping into a really interesting idea that could totally change how we look at financial support, especially when times get tough. It's all about asking, Is there a smarter way to help people out? I mean, you feel it, I feel it, we all feel it, right? The price of just about everything seems to be going up and up. It puts a real squeeze on your wallet, and that leads us to a huge question. With costs climbing like this, is there a better, more intelligent way to provide some relief? And that right there is the heart of the problem. We've all seen prices jump, but for a lot of people, especially folks on Social Security or other fixed incomes, the money coming in just isn't keeping up with the money going out. So we're going to look at one idea that's designed to fix that exact problem.
So what is this new idea all about? Well, because of all the economic challenges we've seen, experts are talking about a pretty major shift in how we handle this stuff. It's a much more targeted approach, and it's really different from what we've done in the past.
The big number at the center of this whole proposal is $2,000. And no, not just as a one-off payment, but as a regular monthly check. This is the number that supporters think could offer some real, consistent help.
Okay, so how would this thing actually play out? Well, the idea is for these ongoing monthly checks, but, and this is the key difference, they wouldn't go to everybody. They'd be aimed specifically at low and fixed income households. The whole goal is to give them immediate spending power to help them cover that gap that inflation has created.
But why do it this way? Why only target certain people? Well, it all boils down to the economics of how different people spend their money. And honestly, this is where the whole proposal gets really fascinating.
The key concept has this really fancy-sounding name, the marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. But don't let the name fool you, it's actually super simple. All it means is, when you get an extra dollar, how much of it do you spend and how fast do you spend it? This one idea is crucial to understanding the entire plan.
And when you look at the studies on this, it's pretty wild. When a lower-income household gets a $2,000 payment, they spend about 80% of it, that's $1,600 in the first 10 days. The rest of it, gone within the next month. That super fast spending is exactly what economists mean when they say someone has a high MPC.
And this just lays out the big difference, right? People with a high MPC, who are usually on lower incomes, spend new money almost immediately, often because they have to, for necessities. On the flip side, folks with higher incomes, the low MPC group, are way more likely to save it, invest it, or pay off debt. That money doesn't get pumped back into the economy nearly as fast, if it even does at all.
So this brings us to a really important comparison. To really get why this new targeted idea is even on the table, we've got to look back at those big stimulus checks that went out in 2020 and 2021 and kind of learn from what happened.
The difference between these two plans is just night and day. The old stimulus went to about 85% of everyone. And look, the intention was good, but the absolutely massive cost was a big factor in the inflation we're all dealing with now. This new proposal is meant to be the exact opposite. Surgically targeted, way less expensive, and designed to give a focused boost to the economy without causing prices to spiral.
Okay, let's really zero in on that cost difference, because the numbers here tell you everything you need to know about why this new strategy is being considered.
Those widespread stimulus checks from a few years back, they cost around $850 billion. Just think about that number for a second. It's a staggering amount of money to push into the economy all at once.
Now compare that to the estimate for this new targeted idea. Giving 3 monthly checks of $2,000 to about 50 million people would cost around $100 billion. That's less than an eighth of the cost for what's argued to be a more direct and sustained impact.
So what does that really mean in practice? It means for a tiny fraction of the cost, this plan could give more consistent, ongoing help directly to the people who need it, all while trying to avoid that big inflationary wave that ends up hurting everybody in the long run.
And all of this leads to what a lot of the experts behind this idea are calling the win-win argument. It's a vision for a more focused, more efficient, and you could argue a fairer way to handle economic relief in the future.
So the argument really is that it's just a smarter way to do things. You're getting money straight to the people who will actually spend it, which gives you a much better bang for your buck in terms of stimulating the economy. And by learning from the past, the goal is to be more cost-effective and a lot fairer, especially to those whose incomes have fallen behind.
And in the end, it really does come back to this simple quote. The whole point of a stimulus check is for people to spend it. I mean, that's why it's called a stimulus. Giving it to people who are just going to park it in a savings account doesn't really achieve that goal. Giving it to the folks who'll spend it right away absolutely does.
Which, of course, leaves us with that one big question. When you look at the lessons from the past, and you follow the economic logic we've just walked through, could this kind of targeted approach be the future of financial relief? It's definitely a powerful idea to think about.
Today, we're diving into some really big proposals that could change the monthly benefits for millions of people who receive supplemental security income, or SSI.
All right, let's start with this number. For 2025, the absolute maximum federal SSI benefit for a single person is $967 a month. That's the ceiling, the most anyone can get from the program each month.
And that brings us to the big question, right? With the cost of everything these days, rent, food, you name it, a lot of people are asking if that amount is really enough to get by.
So to really get what these proposals are all about, we first have to understand the problem they're trying to fix. And it really all comes down to a growing financial gap between SSI benefits and the official poverty level.
You know, it's interesting. When this program was created more than 50 years ago, the whole point was to act as a safety net, to keep people right at the federal poverty line. But over the decades, well, it's fallen behind.
And this chart just lays it all out, doesn't it? On one side, you've got the max SSI benefit at $967. On the other, the 2025 federal poverty line, which is $1,304. You can literally see the gap right there. And that difference comes out to $337 every single month. That's the shortfall. And that number is at the absolute heart of this whole debate. You can really feel the urgency in this quote from our source material. I mean, that's pretty powerful language, and it just shows how strongly some people feel that the system needs to be modernized to close that gap.
Okay, so we've seen the problem. Now, what are the proposed solutions? Well, the first big one is a piece of legislation aimed squarely at closing that financial gap we just looked at.
It's called the SSI Restoration Act. You can basically think of it as a big package of updates trying to modernize parts of the program that, frankly, haven't been touched in decades. The single biggest, most significant change in this act would be to raise the maximum monthly benefit to match the federal poverty line. The goal is to get the program back to doing what it was originally intended to do. So remember that $337 gap? This would close it. For someone getting the maximum benefit, this would mean a direct increase of $337 a month, bringing their total from $967 up to that poverty line figure of $1,304.
Now, this is absolutely critical to understand. This is a proposal. It's being discussed, but it has not been passed by Congress. It is not current law.
Okay, so the next big proposal tackles another part of the program that critics say is seriously out of date, the super strict limits on how much money a person can have in savings.
These limits on assets, they haven't been updated for inflation in decades. This makes it almost impossible for people to save up even a small emergency fund for, a car repair or an unexpected bill.
And the proposed change here is huge. The asset limit for a single person would jump from the current $2,000 all the way up to $10,000. And for married couples, the increase is just as dramatic. It would go from that long-standing $3,000 limit to a proposed $20,000.
To put that in perspective, for an individual, that's a 500% increase in how much they'd be allowed to save without being penalized or losing their benefits.
So, with such significant changes on the table, the natural question is, okay, what's the holdup? What's the current status of all this in Congress?
So just to sum it all up, the SSI Restoration Act is really this bundled package of reforms. It's trying to raise the benefits to the poverty line and also massively increase those savings limits, tackling the two major issues we've just covered. And this brings us to the bottom line. As of today, August 16th, 2025, the SSI Restoration Act has not passed. It is still just a proposal.
So that leaves us with a final thought for this explainer. When you look at that documented gap between the benefits and the poverty line and the fact that these rules haven't been updated in decades, it really makes you wonder, what level of priority should reforming SSI have on the national agenda?
There's a number that's been making a lot of noise lately. A number that could mean an extra $2,400 a year for every single person on Social Security. It's a huge proposal, sparking a ton of hope, but also a pretty fierce debate. So today, we're going to dig in and find out what's really going on.
You've probably seen the headlines, right? The posts on social media, the chatter online, a $2,400 boost to your annual Social Security check. But is this a real possibility we should be paying attention to, or is it just, political noise? Let's try to separate the facts from the fiction here.
Okay, so first things first. Let's talk about the promise itself. We need to break down these numbers that have grabbed everyone's attention and figure out what they could actually mean for millions of American retirees.
So, the big number at the heart of this whole thing is $2,400. That's the proposed annual increase that every Social Security recipient would see in their pocket. And let's be honest, in a time when the cost of everything from gas to groceries seems to be going up, a figure like that, well, it's no wonder it's capturing the public's imagination.
Now, what does a big annual number like that actually mean for your day-to-day life, for your budget? Well, if you break it down, it comes out to an extra $200 every single month. For a lot of folks, that's not just some small bonus. That could be a game changer. That could be the difference needed to cover utility bill, afford prescriptions, or just have a little more breathing room without all that financial stress. It's that monthly figure that makes this proposal feel so real and so appealing.
So where did this idea even come from? It's not just a number somebody pulled out of thin air. It's actually rooted in a formal piece of legislation that's making its way through Washington, D.C. right now. The whole proposal comes from a bill called the Social Security Expansion Act. This is the official legislation that's been introduced in Congress, and its main goal is to make this increase a reality. And that's a really key point. This isn't just a talking point, it's a defined proposal with a very clear objective: boost benefits by $200 a month.
Of course, this immediately brings up the biggest question you can ask with any new spending. Who's going to pay for it? Well, the proposal's answer is to adjust the Social Security payroll tax cap. Right now, there's a ceiling on how much of a person's income gets taxed for Social Security. This act would raise that cap, or maybe even get rid of it altogether. That means high-income earners would end up contributing on a much, much larger portion of their earnings. As you can probably guess, this is one of the most controversial parts of the whole plan.
To really get a feel for the real-world impact, just look at the average person receiving benefits. Right now, their monthly check is around $1,800. With this boost, it would jump up to $2,000. That's about an 11% increase, which is pretty significant. And what this chart doesn't even show is that for people who are on minimum benefits, the impact would be proportionally even bigger. We're talking potentially life-changing.
Okay, so now we have to make a big shift from talking about what the proposal is to whether it could ever actually happen. Because while the idea of an extra $2,400 a year sounds fantastic, its path to becoming law is, to put it mildly, filled with some major political and economic roadblocks.
Yeah, the road to this becoming a law is incredibly steep. I mean, first, politically, it's facing just deep divisions in Congress. Fiscally, it runs headfirst into some really serious concerns about the long-term health of the entire Social Security system. And then you've got the logistical side, potential delays, these really complex questions about fairness between generations, and even unknown ripple effects on other government benefits. It's a lot to tackle.
Let's just break down the debate a little. On one hand, supporters argue, pretty passionately, that this boost is absolutely essential to help seniors keep up with the rising cost of living. They also say, hey, putting more money into the hands of 70 million people, that would be a huge stimulus for the economy. But on the other side, you've got critics raising all sorts of alarms. They're saying it's fiscally irresponsible, and they're worried that injecting billions of dollars into the economy could actually fuel inflation. They also bring up that concern that it puts an unfair financial burden on younger generations who have to foot the bill. It's also really important to manage our expectations about timing. Even in the absolute best-case scenario, the journey from a proposal to an actual payment in your bank account is a long one. A bill gets introduced, then it faces this lengthy, often really contentious debate in Congress. It would almost certainly be changed and modified through compromises. Only after all of that, maybe, it gets approved. And even then, implementation would probably be phased in over time. The big takeaway here? No one should expect to see an extra $200 in their check anytime soon.
And you know, this quote from the source material really gets to the heart of the matter. This whole conversation we're having about a $2,400 boost is really a symptom of a much larger issue. The Social Security system as a whole is facing a crisis, and it desperately needs reform. The question isn't just about this one proposal, it's about how we're going to ensure the entire system stays solvent for our kids and grandkids.
Okay, so with all this uncertainty floating around, what does any of this mean for your own financial planning? Let's step beyond the headlines for a minute and focus on what you can actually control.
This is such a fundamental point, and it often gets lost in these kinds of debates.
It's really worth remembering that when Social Security was first created, it was designed to be one part of a three-legged stool for retirement, right alongside personal savings and pensions. It was never ever meant to be the only source of income for retirees. And keeping that context in mind is absolutely essential for responsible financial planning.
Relying on political promises is a really risky strategy for something as critical as your retirement. Taking proactive control of your own financial security, that is the most reliable path forward no matter what happens in D.C.
You go online and it seems like everyone is talking about one thing. Is a fourth stimulus check on the way? Well, the real answer, it turns out, isn't a simple yes or no, and it's definitely not a date on a calendar. Today, we're going to dig in and figure out what actually needs to happen for another check to even be a possibility. Okay, so this is it, right? This is the big one, the question on everyone's mind, and it's especially critical if you're on a fixed income, Social Security, SSDI, VA benefits. That hope for another payment is really, really strong. But to get a real answer, we've got to look beyond the headlines and get a handle on the economic reality of the situation.
And honestly, this is the most important idea to grasp. A stimulus check isn't some scheduled payment. It's not a holiday bonus. It's an emergency tool, like a fire extinguisher in a glass case. Lawmakers don't just wake up one day and decide to send out money. Something major has to happen to force their hand. So the question isn't when, it's why. And that why? It's all about the health of the U.S. economy.
So what are these big economic triggers? If you look back, every major stimulus payment we've ever gotten has been a reaction to a crisis. It's never proactive. So to figure out what might be coming, we have to learn to watch the same economic vital signs that the folks in Washington are looking at.
I love this analogy because it makes it so clear when the economy, our patient, is healthy and doing well, you don't give it medicine, right? Of course not. But when it gets sick, when it slides into a recession, that's when lawmakers reach for the medicine cabinet. And that stimulus is the dose they use to try and get things moving again. The sicker the patient, well, the bigger the dose of medicine.
Now, of all the vital signs they check, the job market is, without a doubt, the most critical. It's the big one. See, when people are working, money is flowing, the economy is humming along. But the second you see widespread layoffs and rising unemployment, that is a massive flashing red flag that the entire system is in trouble. That's the one thing that gets everyone's attention. And the way we measure this is with something called the official jobs report. You might hear it on the news as the non-farm payroll report. It comes out on the first Friday of every single month, and it gives us this incredibly detailed picture of what's happening with jobs all across the country.
So what's actually in this thing? Well, first, it's got the national unemployment rate. Is it going up, down? That's huge. Then it tells us exactly how many jobs were created, or, and this is the scary part, how many were lost that month. It even looks at average hourly earnings. Are people's wages growing, or are they stuck? And finally, the labor force participation rate. Basically, what percentage of Americans are actually working or trying to find work? If you see all these numbers turn negative and stay negative for a few months in a row, that's the clearest sign that our patient is getting sick.
And this isn't just some abstract theory. If we look back at recent history, there's an undeniable pattern. Major economic problems have been followed consistently by stimulus payments. It's like a playbook they've used over and over again. Just look at this timeline. It lays it out perfectly. Back in 2001, after the dot-com bubble burst, the government sent out $300 checks. Then you fast forward to 2008, the huge housing crisis, the Great Recession. That amount doubled to $600. And then, of course, 2020. The pandemic shuts down the entire world economy, and that first check was $1,200. See the trend? Every single time a massive economic crisis was followed by cash payments directly to the people. You see it, right? It's not just that they sent checks. Look at the amounts. From $300 to $600, it doubled. From $600 to $1,200, it doubled again. Now, look, history isn't always a perfect predictor, but that's a pretty interesting trajectory. It suggests that with each new crisis, lawmakers felt the need for a bigger and bigger dose of that economic medicine. So, does this mean the next check would automatically be $2,400? Well, not so fast. This is just us looking at a historical pattern. It's pure speculation. Any future amount would depend entirely on how bad the next crisis is. A mild recession might only call for a small check, but a really deep economic collapse, a number like this could definitely be on the table. The size of the check is always tied to the size of the problem. And that brings us to another really critical idea. It's not just about how much money, it's about how it's sent out.
See, the last few rounds of checks went to something like 85% of all Americans. But there's a growing argument that maybe, just maybe, that broad shotgun approach isn't the smartest way to do it. Let's compare these two ideas. Broad relief, that's what we're used to, goes to almost everybody. The problem is, a lot of people who get it don't really need it, so they save it. That doesn't help the economy, and it can actually push inflation higher. The other idea is targeted relief. This would focus the money only on low and fixed income folks, the people who are guaranteed to go out and spend it right away on necessities. This gives you way more bang for your buck with less risk of inflation. It could even mean multiple smaller payments over time instead of just one big one.
And that is the absolute fundamental truth of all of this. We have to remember this. A stimulus check is not meant to be a contribution to your savings account. The entire purpose, the only purpose, is to get you to spend it. They want that money flowing through stores and businesses immediately. Buying food, paying bills, getting your car fixed. That spending is the jolt of electricity the economy needs to snap out of a recession.
Okay, so let's put this all together. Instead of listening to rumors online, here's a clear, simple dashboard of what you should actually be watching for. These are the real signals. Think of it as a three-step domino effect. First, you'd see the warning signs. That monthly jobs report would start showing really bad numbers. Month after month, job losses, unemployment taking up a lot. Second, after enough bad data, the experts would make it official. We are in a recession. And third, it's only then, when the crisis is real and undeniable, that you'd see lawmakers in Congress finally scramble to put a stimulus package together, which would probably include direct payments.
So, the bottom line, the most crucial takeaway from all of this is this. Right now, with the economy as it is, a fourth stimulus check just isn't happening. The trigger isn't an online petition, it's not a politician's promise. The only trigger is a real, measurable, and significant economic crisis, one that's bad enough to force Congress to act. Understanding this lets you see past all the noise and know exactly what to look for.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big question to think about. We've seen the stimulus playbook change over time, right? The amounts got bigger, and now we're talking about new, more targeted strategies. So as our economy keeps evolving and faces new and different challenges, how will the government's medicine have to adapt to actually keep working? Something to think about.
If you're one of the tens of millions of Americans who get Social Security, there's a new proposal making some serious waves that you really need to hear about. An advocacy group is pushing hard for a pretty significant, one-time payment for everybody who gets benefits. So in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly what this proposal is, why it's even on the table right now, and what it could all mean for you.
So let's just cut right to the chase. The number at the very heart of this whole conversation is $1,400. Now, this isn't some new monthly increase or a tiny adjustment we see every year. Nope, this is a proposal for a single, direct payment. The whole point is to provide some immediate financial relief. It's a pretty big number, and it's meant to tackle a financial strain that, according to proponents, has been building up for years now.
So who would actually get this money? Well, the proposal isn't just for one small group. It's designed to cover absolutely everyone who receives Social Security benefits. That means retirees, of course, but it also includes folks on Supplemental Security Income, that's SSI, and Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI. The whole idea is to give a big, broad-based boost to all beneficiaries who are trying to make ends meet on these fixed incomes.
Okay, so why now? Why this big push for a $1,400 payment all of a sudden? Well, the answer really gets into a long-running debate over something called the COLA, the Cost of Living Adjustment. The people behind this payment argue at the system we're using right now to adjust benefits for inflation, well, they say it's fundamentally broken and that millions of people are falling further and further behind because of it.
Every year, Social Security benefits get a little bump, a percentage increase, to help people keep their buying power as the prices for, well, everything go up. That's the COLA. And in theory, it sounds like a perfect system, right? If your rent, your groceries, and your gas all get more expensive, your benefits should go up to match. But, and this is a big but, the core argument of this new proposal is that in the real world, it's just not working that way at all.
The main voice you're hearing behind this push is a nonpartisan group called the Senior Citizens League, or TSCL for short. For years, they've been making this case that the annual COLA increases are, to put it simply, just not enough. They argue there's this growing gap between the benefit increases people get in their checks and the actual real-world inflation they're facing, especially for the big things like housing, food, and of course, healthcare.
And this right here gets to the technical, kind of nerdy heart of the problem. See, the current COLA is calculated using something called the CPIW. It basically tracks the spending habits of younger, working-age people in cities. But critics, like the TSCL, say that's a huge flaw. Why? Because the spending habits of a 40-year-old office worker are completely different from a 75-year-old retiree. For example, seniors spend a much bigger chunk of their income on healthcare, a cost that the CPIW barely registers. So the TSCL wants to switch to the CPIE, which is based on the spending of the elderly. They say this would finally give a true picture of the inflation seniors are up against and lead to much fairer benefit increases.
In this quote from Shannon Benton, the executive director at TSCL, it really frames the whole issue perfectly. For years and years, beneficiaries have been saying, hey, my costs are going up way faster than my benefits. This quote flips the whole script. It says, instead of doubting the lived daily experience of millions of people on fixed incomes, maybe, just maybe, it's time to admit that the tool we're using to measure their costs is the thing that's actually broken.
So moving beyond all the technical arguments about inflation and indexes, what's the real-world evidence for this payment? Well, the TSCL has gathered some really compelling data that, honestly, paints a pretty stark picture of the financial pressures that millions of beneficiaries are dealing with right now, today.
Just let this number sink in for a minute. 7.3 million. According to the TSCL's research, that is how many American seniors are trying to get by on less than $1,000 a month. That's not just a low number, it's below the federal poverty line. And as the organization points out, in most cities, that's less than what you'd pay for just a modest apartment, let alone food, utilities, medicine, everything else. This is the reality that's fueling this urgent call for relief. And this dependency it's absolutely key to understanding the problem. For so many people, Social Security isn't just a little extra check to help out. It's their entire livelihood. This research shows that for nearly 4 out of every 10 beneficiaries, Social Security isn't just part of their income, it is 100% of their income. So when that's your only source of money, even a small gap between your benefit increases and the rising cost of living can be completely devastating.
And when you look at the opinions of the beneficiaries themselves, the message is crystal clear. A survey by the TSCL found just overwhelming support for changing how the COLA is calculated. We're talking 96% in favor of using an index like the CPIE that actually reflects their spending. The survey also found that 1/5 of seniors are spending over $1,000 a month just on healthcare. And maybe the most telling part, 4 out of 5 felt that inflation was way higher than the official numbers the government was reporting. So this isn't just a policy debate, it's this widespread feeling of being left behind.
Now, it's really important to understand that this whole idea of a direct payment isn't just coming out of thin air. There's actually a history of the federal government providing this exact kind of direct assistance. This $1,400 proposal is really part of a much bigger ongoing conversation about how we can strengthen Social Security benefits for everyone. If you look back, you can see some really clear examples. Back during the Great Recession in 2009, the government sent out $250 economic recovery payments to people on Social Security and SSI. And of course, much more recently, during the pandemic, millions of us got those economic impact payments, the stimulus checks. The TSCL points to these examples as proof that when things get economically uncertain, the government can and has stepped in with direct financial help. This new proposal fits right into that pattern.
And this proposal for a one-time payment, it's not the only idea out there for boosting benefits. Not by a long shot. There have been several other pretty big plans discussed recently. For example, Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren brought back the Social Security Expansion Act. That's a bill that would increase benefits by $2,400 a year, so $200 every month. And similarly, during his 2020 campaign, Joe Biden also proposed a $200 per month increase. This all just goes to show that the push for a $1,400 check is part of a much wider call from a lot of different people to provide more substantial support.
So with all of this context, you've got the flawed COLA, the real financial hardship, the history of these kinds of payments, and all these other proposals floating around, we finally get to the big question. We have this compelling proposal on the table. So what happens next? Where does this whole idea go from here?
Okay, this right here is the most important thing to clarify right now. The $1,400 catch-up payment is a proposal from the Senior Citizens League. It is not a bill sitting in Congress, and it is definitely not a law. It's an idea that's being pushed by a very influential advocacy group to spark a conversation and, frankly, to put some pressure on lawmakers. The goal is to get this concept onto the legislative agenda, but as of today, that's what it is, a proposal.
So let's do a quick recap of the key takeaways from all this. First, a major advocacy group, the TSCL, is pushing for a one-time $1,400 payment.
Second, this is a direct response to the cost of living adjustments that they say just haven't kept up with real-world inflation for seniors. Third, their case is backed up by some pretty stark data on financial hardship. And finally, this kind of direct payment isn't new. It has been used before during tough economic times.
And that leaves us with this final really crucial question. This $1,400 proposal, it's a potential short-term fix for a very long-term problem. And whether this specific plan ever moves forward or not, the underlying issues, how do we accurately measure inflation for seniors? How do we make sure benefits provide a dignified standard of living? Those questions aren't going away. It really forces all of us to think bigger. As our economy keeps changing, how does this fundamental pillar of our social safety net need to evolve right along with it?
This whole debate has proven one thing for sure. Millions of seniors are struggling financially. But is another benefit increase the real long-term answer? Or is it just the temporary patch on a system that needs fundamental, deep reform to survive for the next generation? That is the real question for the future of Social Security.
So what would it really take for another round of stimulus checks to be sent out? It is, without a doubt, a question on millions of people's minds. And you know what? The answer might be a lot closer than you think. Today, we're going to cut through all the noise and look at the real, concrete economic signals that could actually trigger that next wave of support. Look, this is the question, right? It's probably one of the most common questions being asked right now. And if you're wondering about it, you are definitely not alone. The fact that so many people are even asking tells its own story. A lot of folks are feeling the financial squeeze. But to find the real answer, we can't just look at our own finances. We have to look somewhere else entirely. And this is the fundamental idea we have to start with. A stimulus check, sure, it feels incredibly personal. It lands right in your bank account. But where it comes from? Not personal at all. You have to think of it like a giant emergency lever the government pulls when the entire economic engine of the country starts to stall. They're not trying to fix your personal budget. They're trying to fix the country's economy. Okay, let's really break this down because this gets right to the heart of everything. On one side, you have the common assumption, which makes total sense. People are hurting, they need help, so the government should help. It's logical. But on the other side, you have the economic reality. The government really only acts when the entire economy is in trouble, when it's shrinking, when it's heading for a recession. Those stimulus checks we get are really just a side effect of that much bigger problem. The economy is the patient, and the stimulus check is the emergency medicine. So if we're going to be economic detectives, watching for these signs of weakness, where do we look first? Well, there is one single report that stands head and shoulders above all the rest. It's the most important vital sign for the U.S. economy, and that is the monthly jobs report. Every first Friday of the month, this report drops, and it's basically a national health checkup. It's the biggest barometer we've got. Now, the unemployment rate, that's the headline number everyone talks about. But the details inside are what really tell the story. You see things like average hourly earnings. Are people's wages actually keeping up with prices? And maybe the most important one is the labor participation rate. That tells us if people are so discouraged that they've just given up looking for a job altogether. Put it all together and you get a really clear picture of whether the economy is creating jobs or losing them.
I want you to just look at this number for a second. 1.8 million. It's a huge, huge figure. What in the world could that represent? Well, this number is the key to understanding why even tiny little changes in that jobs report have absolutely massive consequences. And there it is. For every single percentage point the unemployment rate goes up, another 1.8 million people have lost their jobs. Just let that sink in. A headline might say unemployment ticked up by 0.1%. That sounds like nothing, right? But that tiny tick means 180,000 people are suddenly out of work. It's not just a statistic. It's a huge wave of disruption hitting families and towns all across the country. And that disruption, it doesn't stop there. This is where we see the snowball effect. It's what economists call a vicious cycle. You see, a weak job market isn't just a one-time thing. It's the start of a chain reaction that can pull the whole economy down. It starts out pretty slow, but believe me, it picks up speed really, really fast. Let's walk through this dangerous cycle. So first, the unemployment rate starts to climb. What happens next? Well, naturally, when people lose their paychecks, they stop spending money. So step 2, consumer spending falls. People put off buying that car or fixing the roof or even just eating out. Then, because customers aren't buying, businesses see their sales drop. So step 3, they contract. They cut back, they cancel plans, and eventually they have to do more layoffs. And that, of course, leads to step 4, pushing the unemployment rate even higher. You see how this works? The cycle just keeps feeding on itself, getting worse each time around. This quote just captures it perfectly. The government is watching this cycle gain speed and momentum. They know that once it really gets going, it's incredibly hard to stop. And that exact moment, when that cycle is threatening to spiral, that's when stimulus checks go from being a vague idea to an urgent plan. The whole point of a stimulus check is to jump right into step 2, to boost consumer spending and try to break that cycle before it gets any worse.
So the jobs report is signal number 1 for sure. But there's another really crucial indicator that tells the same story: what the Federal Reserve is doing with interest rates. Watching the Fed gives us a peek behind the curtain at their private assessment of how the economy is really doing.
It's really a tale of two different approaches. When the economy is running hot and growing fast, the Fed worries about inflation. So they raise interest rates to make borrowing money more expensive, which kind of cools everything down. But the opposite is also true. When the Fed starts cutting interest rates, that is a crystal clear signal that they think the economy is weak and needs a boost. They're making it cheaper to borrow money to try and get businesses and people spending again.
And this brings us to a super important rule of thumb. When you see the Federal Reserve start aggressively cutting interest rates, even if officials are on TV saying the economy is strong, you need to pay attention to what they do, not what they say. Those rate cuts are a hidden signal. They're a quiet admission that behind the scenes, the data they're looking at is worrying enough to step in. They're trying to get ahead of a bigger problem.
And this isn't just some abstract theory. This link between a weak economy and a big government response is a very well-established pattern. In fact, if you look back at every major recession we've had in recent memory, the playbook is remarkably consistent. I mean, the historical record here is undeniable. In 2001, after the tech bubble popped, boom, we got stimulus checks. In 2008, during the Great Financial Crisis, boom, stimulus checks. And in 2020, when the pandemic started, boom, we got multiple rounds of stimulus checks. Every single major economic downturn in the last 25 years has been met with the exact same response. It's just become a standard tool in the economic toolkit. This quote from one of the sources just says it all, doesn't it? The response is predictable. When the economy hits a major wall, rising unemployment, shrinking growth, the government and the Fed act. They cut interest rates and they send out money. History shows us this isn't really an if question anymore. It's a when question.
Now, a lot of us think the government is just too slow to react. But when a real crisis hits, they can move with incredible speed. Let's just look at the example from late 2020. A stimulus bill was signed into law on December 28th. The very next day, December 29th, direct deposits were already starting to hit people's bank accounts. Within a week, almost everyone had their money. The point is, the system is already built. When they decide to turn on the faucet, the money can flow almost immediately.
So, this really brings us to the ultimate takeaway. We need to shift how we think about this. The real question isn't if the government will do this again. History tells us they will. The real question is, what's the pain threshold? How bad does the economy have to get? How high does unemployment have to climb before they're finally forced to pull that lever one more time? By understanding these signals, the jobs report, what the Fed is doing, the historical pattern, you're now equipped to watch the economy for yourself. So the next time you see a headline about the unemployment rate ticking up, you'll know it isn't just a number, it's a signal. And the real question is, how many more of those signals will we need to see before action becomes inevitable?
Today, we are diving deep into a really critical conversation that's happening right now about the financial health of millions of American seniors. With costs going through the roof and benefits just not keeping up, there are two major ideas on the table. One is a one-time stimulus-style payment for some quick relief. The other, a permanent change to how Social Security benefits are calculated for long-term stability. Let's get into it.
I want to start with just one number. Look at this, 5 million. It's a massive figure, and honestly, it represents a very real and growing crisis that we just can't ignore.
So, what does 5 million mean? Well, that's the estimated number of seniors whose Social Security checks will fall below the poverty line by next year. This isn't some far-off problem, it's right around the corner. And it's a financial reality that is sparking a huge conversation all across the country about how we can provide some real, meaningful support.
All right, so here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we're going to break down the financial squeeze that so many seniors are feeling. Then, we'll dig into why the system that's supposed to help, that annual cost of living adjustment, or COLA, is actually falling short. From there, we'll look at the two big solutions being proposed, a one-time payment versus a permanent fix. And finally, we'll see where this whole debate is headed.
Okay, let's get to the heart of the problem, this day-to-day financial squeeze.
For millions of retirees, that Social Security check was supposed to be a rock of stability. But now it feels like it's shrinking every month, even if the number on the check is the same. It's creating this intense, constant financial pressure.
You know, this quote from the Senior Citizens League really hits the nail on the head. A sharp erosion in their purchasing power. What does that actually mean? It means the money you have just doesn't go as far. The same $100 bill that used to cover a week of groceries now barely covers a few days. That gap between income and the actual cost of living is just getting wider and wider.
And look, this isn't some abstract economic theory. It has real-world consequences. We're talking about seniors having to choose between paying their rent and buying medicine. We're talking about falling behind on home payments or stressing about the utility bill. And a huge piece of this puzzle, as the source material points out, is the sky-high cost of healthcare. Some seniors are shelling out over $1,000 a month out of pocket, even with Medicare.
So, you might be thinking, wait a minute, isn't there a system for this? Don't they adjust benefits for inflation every year? And the answer is yes, they do. But a huge part of the problem is how they calculate that adjustment.
It's called the Cost of Living Adjustment, or COLA. On paper, it's a fantastic idea. Every year, benefits get a bump to help people keep pace with rising prices. Sounds perfect, right? Well, in practice, there's a fundamental flaw in the machine.
And this, right here, this is the core of the issue. The current COLA is based on something called the CPIW. It tracks the spending habits of younger, working-age people. But think about it. The budget of a 35-year-old is completely different from a 75-year-old's, right? The current formula barely accounts for seniors' biggest expenses, especially healthcare. The proposed fix is to switch to the CPIE, an index designed specifically for the elderly. It would actually track what seniors spend their money on, which could lead to much more realistic benefit increases.
And here's what that flawed calculation looks like in the real world. This year's 2.5% COLI increase? For a lot of people, it was completely eaten up by the jump in Medicare Part B premiums. So, the Social Security check got a little bigger, but another key expense grew right along with it. The end result? Zero actual increase in their spending power. They were left standing in the exact same spot.
Okay, so since the current system clearly isn't cutting it, advocates are pushing for solutions. And the first major proposal is all about immediate impact, a one-time catch-up payment. Think of it like a targeted stimulus check just for Social Security recipients.
The number that keeps coming up, the one recommended most often by analysts and experts, is $1,400. This is seen as a big enough payment to provide some real, immediate breathing room for folks who've fallen behind on bills or need to cover a major expense.
Now, while the idea of a one-time check is gaining a lot of steam, the exact amount is still being debated. Some point back to a $250 payment made in 2009, but with today's costs, many experts are saying that's just not enough. They're pushing for a much more significant figure, like that $1,400 we just saw, or even as high as $2,000 to really make a meaningful difference.
The Senior Citizens League is a major voice behind this idea. They call it a make-up payment, and that framing is really important. They're basically saying, listen, for years the COLA has shortchanged seniors. This payment isn't a handout. It's about making up for that lost ground. It's all about providing a financial lifeline right now.
But, you know, a one-time payment is kind of like a bandage. It helps right away, but it doesn't fix the underlying problem. And that brings us to the second major proposal, a permanent, structural fix to the COLA formula itself.
And the support for this idea among the people it would actually affect is, well, it's absolutely overwhelming. A survey found that 96% of Social Security beneficiaries want to switch to the CPIE. That's not just a majority, that's a nearly unanimous call for a real systemic change.
So, how would this actually work? Well, first, Congress would have to pass a law to officially adopt the CPIE. Right away, that new formula would start tracking the costs that seniors really face, like housing and out-of-pocket medical expenses. Since those costs tend to rise faster, the annual COLA would almost certainly be higher. This would mean that monthly checks wouldn't just get a tiny bump, they'd grow in a meaningful way year after year.
And let's be clear, this is not a small tweak. According to analysts, switching to the CPIE could boost monthly benefits by an estimated $200 to $500 every single month. Let's make that real. If your current benefit is, say, $1,500 a month, this change could potentially push it to $1,700 or even $2,000. That's not a one-time check. That's a permanent raise to your monthly income, forever.
So we're at a crossroads, right? We have two very different approaches on the table.
One is like a rapid infusion of cash to deal with the crisis we're in right now. The other is a deep structural reform designed to prevent this crisis from ever happening again.
Let's break it down side by side. The one-time stimulus is all about immediate help, a big chunk of cash to help people who are drowning in bills today. The permanent COLA fix is about long-term security, a smaller but consistent monthly boost that ensures people's benefits actually keep up with their costs in the future. It's a classic debate. Do you solve the urgent problem of the present, or do you secure the future?
And this isn't just talk. This debate has real political momentum. You have lawmakers from both sides of the aisle, people like Bernie Sanders and Bill Cassidy, all pushing for some kind of benefit increase. That bipartisan interest tells you just how urgent and widespread this problem has become.
Which brings us to the one central question this entire debate rests on. What do seniors need most right now? Is it the immediate urgent relief of a one-time payment to help them catch up, or is it the lasting security of a permanent structural fix? That's the choice facing policymakers, and the decision they make will impact millions of lives for years to come.
So let's talk about something you've probably heard a lot about, this idea of giving every single person on Social Security an extra $200 a month. I mean, on the surface, it sounds amazing, right? A huge boost for millions of people. But, as we're about to find out, when you dig into the details, it gets a whole lot more complicated. All right, let's get into it.
You know, this one quote really just sums up the whole thing perfectly. It's a plan that comes from a really good place, trying to help folks who depend on Social Security. But it's also got this giant, fundamental flaw that makes it, well, almost impossible to actually do. So the big question we're going to tackle here is, what's the good part? And what's the really, really flawed part? And maybe, just maybe, is there a better way to do it?
So, first things first, where did this idea even come from? Because it's not just some rumor bouncing around online. Nope, it actually comes from real legislative proposals that have been kicked around for years. Let's break down what this plan is really all about.
Okay, so this whole idea is a huge piece of something called the Social Security Expansion Act. Now, this act has a lot in it, but the part that gets all the headlines, the part everyone talks about, is that permanent $200 a month raise in benefits. And it's important to note this isn't some brand new idea. A temporary version was talked about back in 2020, but this proposal, this one wants to make that raise a permanent part of Social Security.
Now let's be super clear about what this means for an individual. That $200 every month adds up to an extra $2,400 over a year. I mean, for anyone on a fixed income, that is a life-changing amount of money. Seriously, that could be the difference between just scraping by and actually having some breathing room. And the big promise here is that every single person getting a Social Security check gets this money.
An extra $2,400 a year. Sounds great, doesn't it? But this right here is where we bump into the other half of that quote we started with, the massively flawed part. And it all boils down to one thing, the absolutely staggering cost of making that promise to everybody. When you start running the numbers, you see the real problem.
First, you have to wrap your head around just how massive the Social Security program is. We are talking about roughly 72.5 million people getting a check every month. And that's not just retirees. This includes people on disability, it includes survivors, it includes spouses. It's a huge, diverse group of Americans who count on that money.
Okay, so what happens when you multiply those 72.5 million people by an extra $200? The math is simple, but the answer is, well, it's pretty stunning. It would cost an extra $14.5 billion. And that's not for a year. That's every single month. That's an enormous new expense that has to be covered every 30 days.
And when you stretch that out over a full year, the true size of the price tag just hits you, $174 billion. Just to put that into perspective, the government's already paying out over $1.3 trillion a year in benefits. This would add another $174 billion on top of that, every single year. For a lot of lawmakers, that number stops the conversation cold, especially since the Social Security Trust Fund is already being used to cover current payments.
And this gets us to the real, logical heart of the issue. The cost is so huge because the plan is for everyone, no exceptions, which forces us to ask a really important question. Is this the smartest way to spend that money? Does the person getting the absolute maximum benefit need this raised just as badly as the person getting the absolute minimum?
And here it is. This is the big flaw, laid out for everyone to see. Under this plan, someone who is already getting, say, $4,000 a month from Social Security gets the exact same $200 raise as someone who is really struggling on less than $1,000 a month. Now, don't get me wrong, an extra $200 is nice for anybody, but it's not really needed by people at the top end of the scale, and that untargeted approach is what makes the plan so expensive, and frankly, what makes a lot of people say it just doesn't make sense.
So, if the give it to everyone plan is way too expensive and not very efficient, what's the alternative? Well, this is where the idea of targeting comes in. Instead of a blanket raise for all, what if we focus that money on the people who need it the most? Let's check out a couple of much more realistic options.
We can really break this down into two simple, logical ideas. The first one, let's call it the half plan, would give that $200 raise only to people whose monthly check is at or below the national average. Then there's a second, even more focused idea, the poverty line plan, which would send that money only to those whose benefits are so low that they're at or below the federal poverty line.
And right here, you can see just how dramatically the money changes when you start targeting it. The universal plan, we know, is for all 72.5 million people and costs $174 billion a year. But look at the half plan. By focusing on about half the people, around 36 million, the cost drops to about 85 billion. And then, with the poverty line plan, targeting the 12 million lowest income folks, the cost plummets to just $36 billion a year.
So this is the key takeaway. Just by being a little smarter about who gets the money, you can slash the cost of the whole thing. Moving to the half plan cuts the price tag by more than half. And going to the super targeted poverty line plan, that reduces the cost by almost 80%. All of a sudden, you're talking about numbers that are way, way more manageable, both financially and politically.
So all this brings us to the final, and let's be honest, probably the most important question. Could any of this actually happen? I mean, a plan is just a plan until it becomes a law. How would politicians in Washington actually look at these different proposals? Well, it really all comes down to the simple math of cost versus impact.
Look, if you walk into a lawmaker's office with a plan that costs $174 billion extra a year for a system that's already under strain, that conversation is probably going to be pretty short. They'll just say it's not going to happen. But if you walk in with a plan that costs $85 billion, or even better, $36 billion, and you can show that every single one of those dollars is going to the people struggling the most, well, that's a completely different conversation. That's a plan you can actually defend.
And that's the political reality of it, right? It's pretty easy to vote no on a massive, unfocused spending bill. It's a whole lot harder to stand up and vote against the plan specifically designed to lift 12 million of our most vulnerable seniors and disabled citizens out of poverty. The moral argument there is just so much more powerful, which makes that super targeted plan the most likely to ever get any real momentum.
So, we end up right back where we started. The idea of a $200 raise is a good one at its core, but giving it to everyone is a deeply flawed approach. The numbers don't lie, a targeted plan is just far more realistic and efficient. But that leaves us with one final big question. We have a logical path that could provide real, meaningful help to millions. The question is, in today's political world, is logic enough to actually get something done for the people who need it the most?
What if, instead of sending checks to almost everyone, we sent out fewer checks but made them way more powerful? We're talking about ongoing, monthly payments, but, and this is the key part, only for a very specific group of people. Let's get into it.
All right, first up, let's just take a second and think back to 2020 and 2021. Remember those 3 big stimulus checks? A lot of us got them, and for some people, they were an absolute lifeline. But the big question this new report is asking is, was that really the best way to do it? Could we have gotten a bigger economic bang for our buck, with fewer negative side effects?
So the approach back then was, well, it was broad. I mean, incredibly broad. We're talking about checks going out to something like 85% of the entire U.S. population. The idea was pretty simple, right? Just get money into as many hands as possible, as fast as possible. But, as this report points out, that kind of blanket approach, it came with a massive kind of hidden cost.
And what was that cost? Well, in a word, inflation. According to this study, printing and just sending out trillions of dollars to almost everyone is a huge reason we saw that crazy inflation and all the supply chain chaos. The report uses a great analogy. It was like flooding an engine. Just too much, too fast, all at once. So if that didn't work perfectly, what's the alternative?
Okay, so to really get what this new proposal is all about, we got to wrap our heads around one core economic idea. And it's actually pretty simple. It's this. Not every dollar is spent the same way. The way different people use a new dollar they get, well, that's the whole secret to making a stimulus plan actually work.
All right, so here's the fancy economic term for it. Marginal propensity to consume, or MPC for short. Now I know, that sounds super complicated, but I promise it's not. It really just boils down to one simple question. If I handed you an extra dollar right now, what would you do with it? Would you spend it right away on groceries, gas, bills, or would you stick it in your savings account? That one little concept, that's the foundation for this whole new way of thinking about stimulus. So this study kind of breaks people down into three main groups based on this MPC idea. First up, you've got your high MPC folks. These are generally lower income people who, look, when they get an extra buck, it's got to go right back out the door for necessities. Then you've got the medium MPC group. This is often your middle income crowd. They'll spend some of it, for sure, but they're probably going to save a good chunk of it too. And finally, you have the low MPC group. These are your high income individuals. An extra dollar for them, it's much, much more likely to get saved or invested instead of spent. So you see the pattern, right? The more money you make, the less likely you are to immediately spend the next dollar you get.
And this right here, this is really the heart of the matter. A stimulus check, it isn't supposed to be a gift. The whole point is right there in the name, to stimulate the economy. And for that to happen, what needs to happen? The money has to be spent. It has to move. And as you can see, giving a dollar to someone in that high MPC group, well, you get the most bang for your buck immediately. Over 80 cents of that dollar goes right back into the economy. That effect gets smaller and smaller with the other groups. So the bottom line is pretty clear. If you want maximum stimulus, you got to give the money to the people who are going to spend it.
Okay, so now that we've got this MPC thing down, we can look at the actual plan this report is proposing for the next time the economy takes a nosedive. And it is a radically different approach. It's laser-focused, super efficient, and, they argue, way more powerful.
And the big number at the center of this whole thing? $2,000. But get this, it's not a one-time check. The proposal is for $2,000 a month, an ongoing payment designed to create real stability and a continuous flow of spending into the economy.
Now here's the crucial part. This is not for everyone. The plan is super targeted. It's aimed specifically at low-income and fixed-income folks. Think people on Social Security, disability, SSI, and VA benefits. And why them? Well, it's exactly what we just talked about. This is the high MPC group. These are the people who will take that money and, out of necessity, immediately put it back into the economy. And it's not a forever thing either. It's designed as a temporary fix, just for a few months during a really bad recession, to basically jumpstart the economic engine.
So you might be asking, okay, what's the big advantage of this laser-focused approach? Well, it's simple. You get a much bigger bang for your buck, a much bigger economic impact for a surprisingly smaller price tag. It's really about being strategic, you know, instead of just dropping cash from a helicopter and hoping for the best.
Let's just compare these two approaches side by side, because this really puts it all into perspective. The old way, checks to 85% of the country, costing nearly $1 trillion. And the result, the report argues, was a ton of inflation. The new proposal, you target a much smaller group, maybe 50 to 100 million people, the ones who need it the most and will spend it the fastest. The total cost, a few $100 billion. So you get a faster, more direct boost to the economy, you help the people who are most vulnerable, and you do it all for a fraction of the cost and with way, way less risk of causing that crazy inflation.
Okay, now I have to be super clear about this next part. This is really important. As fascinating as this idea is, right now it is just that, an idea, a proposal. This is not a current government policy.
In fact, the report itself says it directly, and I'm quoting here, a $2,000 check has not been approved right now. So I just want to make sure everyone understands, this is a research paper, it's not an active program you can sign up for.
So what's the point of all this then? Well, the real value here isn't about a check that's coming in the mail tomorrow. The value is that this is a potential blueprint for the future. It's a detailed, data-driven game plan that policymakers can look at the next time we hit a big economic crisis. It's really all about learning from what happened last time so we can have a smarter, better, and less damaging response in the future.
And that really leaves us with one big final question to think about. Instead of these huge, broad, one-size-fits-all solutions, could this be the future? Is this kind of smart, targeted, data-driven support the new way we handle economic recovery? This report, for one, makes a really compelling case that it just might be.
All right, if you're one of the tens of millions of Americans who get Social Security, there's a new proposal making some serious waves that you really need to hear about. An advocacy group is pushing hard for a pretty significant, one-time payment for everybody who gets benefits. So in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly what this proposal is, why it's even on the table right now, and what it could all mean for you.
So let's just cut right to the chase. The number at the very heart of this whole conversation is $1,400. Now, this isn't some new monthly increase or a tiny adjustment we see every year. Nope, this is a proposal for a single, direct payment. The whole point is to provide some immediate financial relief. It's a pretty big number, and it's meant to tackle a financial strain that, according to proponents, has been building up for years now.
So who would actually get this money? Well, the proposal isn't just for one small group. It's designed to cover absolutely everyone who receives Social Security benefits. That means retirees, of course, but it also includes folks on Supplemental Security Income, that's SSI, and Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI. The whole idea is to give a big, broad-based boost to all beneficiaries who are trying to make ends meet on these fixed incomes.
Okay, so why now? Why this big push for a $1,400 payment all of a sudden? Well, the answer really gets into a long-running debate over something called the COLA, the Cost of Living Adjustment. The people behind this payment argue at the system we're using right now to adjust benefits for inflation, well, they say it's fundamentally broken and that millions of people are falling further and further behind because of it.
Every year, Social Security benefits get a little bump, a percentage increase, to help people keep their buying power as the prices for, well, everything go up. That's the COLA. And in theory, it sounds like a perfect system, right? If your rent, your groceries, and your gas all get more expensive, your benefits should go up to match. But, and this is a big but, the core argument of this new proposal is that in the real world, it's just not working that way at all.
The main voice you're hearing behind this push is a nonpartisan group called the Senior Citizens League, or TSCL for short. For years, they've been making this case that the annual COLA increases are, to put it simply, just not enough. They argue there's this growing gap between the benefit increases people get in their checks and the actual real-world inflation they're facing, especially for the big things like housing, food, and of course, healthcare.
And this right here gets to the technical, kind of nerdy heart of the problem. See, the current COLA is calculated using something called the CPIW. It basically tracks the spending habits of younger, working-age people in cities. But critics, like the TSCL, say that's a huge flaw. Why? Because the spending habits of a 40-year-old office worker are completely different from a 75-year-old retiree. For example, seniors spend a much bigger chunk of their income on healthcare, a cost that the CPIW barely registers. So the TSCL wants to switch to the CPIE, which is based on the spending of the elderly. They say this would finally give a true picture of the inflation seniors are up against and lead to much fairer benefit increases.
And this quote from Shannon Benton, the executive director at TSCL, it really frames the whole issue perfectly. For years and years, beneficiaries have been saying, hey, my costs are going up way faster than my benefits. This quote flips the whole script. It says, instead of doubting the lived daily experience of millions of people on fixed incomes, maybe, just maybe, it's time to admit that the tool we're using to measure their costs is the thing that's actually broken.
So moving beyond all the technical arguments about inflation and indexes, what's the real-world evidence for this payment? Well, the TSCL has gathered some really compelling data that, honestly, paints a pretty stark picture of the financial pressures that millions of beneficiaries are dealing with right now, today.
Just let this number sink in for a minute. 7.3 million. According to the TSCL's research, that is how many American seniors are trying to get by on less than $1,000 a month. That's not just a low number, it's below the federal poverty line. And as the organization points out, in most cities, that's less than what you'd pay for just a modest apartment, let alone food, utilities, medicine, everything else. This is the reality that's fueling this urgent call for relief. And this dependency it's absolutely key to understanding the problem. For so many people, Social Security isn't just a little extra check to help out. It's their entire livelihood. This research shows that for nearly 4 out of every 10 beneficiaries, Social Security isn't just part of their income, it is 100% of their income. So when that's your only source of money, even a small gap between your benefit increases and the rising cost of living can be completely devastating.
And when you look at the opinions of the beneficiaries themselves, the message is crystal clear. A survey by the TSCL found just overwhelming support for changing how the COLA is calculated. We're talking 96% in favor of using an index like the CPIE that actually reflects their spending. The survey also found that 1/5 of seniors are spending over $1,000 a month just on healthcare. And maybe the most telling part, 4 out of 5 felt that inflation was way higher than the official numbers the government was reporting. So this isn't just a policy debate, it's this widespread feeling of being left behind.
Now, it's really important to understand that this whole idea of a direct payment isn't just coming out of thin air. There's actually a history of the federal government providing this exact kind of direct assistance. This $1,400 proposal is really part of a much bigger ongoing conversation about how we can strengthen Social Security benefits for everyone. If you look back, you can see some really clear examples. Back during the Great Recession in 2009, the government sent out $250 economic recovery payments to people on Social Security and SSI. And of course, much more recently, during the pandemic, millions of us got those economic impact payments, the stimulus checks. The TSCL points to these examples as proof that when things get economically uncertain, the government can and has stepped in with direct financial help,
This new proposal fits right into that pattern.
And this proposal for a one-time payment, it's not the only idea out there for boosting benefits. Not by a long shot. There have been several other pretty big plans discussed recently. For example, Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren brought back the Social Security Expansion Act. That's a bill that would increase benefits by $2,400 a year, so $200 every month. And similarly, during his 2020 campaign, Joe Biden also proposed a $200 per month increase. This all just goes to show that the push for a $1,400 check is part of a much wider call from a lot of different people to provide more substantial support.
So with all of this context, you've got the flawed COLA, the real financial hardship, the history of these kinds of payments, and all these other proposals floating around, we finally get to the big question. We have this compelling proposal on the table, so what happens next? Where does this whole idea go from here?
Okay, this right here is the most important thing to clarify right now. The $1,400 catch-up payment is a proposal from the Senior Citizens League. It is not a bill sitting in Congress, and it is definitely not a law. It's an idea that's being pushed by a very influential advocacy group to spark a conversation and, frankly, to put some pressure on lawmakers. The goal is to get this concept onto the legislative agenda, but as of today, that's what it is, a proposal.
So let's do a quick recap of the key takeaways from all this. First, a major advocacy group, the TSCL, is pushing for a one-time $1,400 payment. Second, this is a direct response to the cost of living adjustments that they say just haven't kept up with real-world inflation for seniors. Third, their case is backed up by some pretty stark data on financial hardship. And finally, this kind of direct payment isn't new. It has been used before during tough economic times.
And that leaves us with this final really crucial question. This $1,400 proposal, it's a potential short-term fix for a very long-term problem. And whether this specific plan ever moves forward or not, the underlying issues, how do we accurately measure inflation for seniors? How do we make sure benefits provide a dignified standard of living? Those questions aren't going away. It really forces all of us to think bigger. As our economy keeps changing, how does this fundamental pillar of our social safety net need to evolve right along with it?
So you've probably seen the headlines floating around about a $2,200 bonus check from Social Security. And you're likely wondering, is this for real? Am I going to get one? Well, today we're going to cut through all the noise and separate the fact from the fiction. Because believe it or not, behind this one very confusing term is a huge high-stakes debate over the entire future of Social Security.
Okay, so this is the big question, right? It's the one at the heart of all the buzz. So let's just get straight to the answer. And the short answer is no. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but there is no extra payment on its way. The term $2,200 bonus check isn't about getting more money in your pocket tomorrow. Nope, it's actually a catchy and kind of misleading label for a really controversial idea that could completely change Social Security as we know it. To really understand this whole myth, we have to dig into where that $2,200 number even came from. I mean, it wasn't just pulled out of thin air. It actually represents what some researchers are calling a critical line in the sand. Here's the basic idea. The term bonus check is a label that researchers have slapped on Social Security payments that go to higher income folks. The argument is that for these people who often have other sources of income, that monthly check isn't a lifeline they need for rent or food. It acts more like, well, a supplementary bonus. And this is the magic number they came up with, $2,200 a month. What the researchers found was that, for the most part, beneficiaries getting less than this amount rely on it for their basic essentials. But people getting more than this are way more likely to see it as extra, supplemental income. And this one number, this single dividing line, became the turning point for a massive policy debate. So this really creates what you could call a tale of two different benefits. For one group of people, that monthly payment is an absolute lifeline. For another group, it's viewed as something closer to a bonus. Let's really look at what the research says about the difference here. So on one side, you have the lifeline group. Their check covers the absolute basics. We're talking rent, groceries, medical bills. Then, on the other side, you've got the bonus group. These folks often have other financial streams coming in, pensions, 401ks, investments, maybe even a part-time job. For them, the Social Security check is definitely nice to have, but it's not what's keeping the lights on. And this fundamental difference in need is the entire foundation for this whole reform proposal. You see, it really just boils down to perception and necessity. The bigger the benefit check gets, the more it starts to feel like a bonus instead of a monthly stipend you absolutely need to survive. This psychological shift is the key that unlocks the logic behind this entire
pretty radical reform idea.
Okay, so using this lifeline versus bonus idea, a very specific plan has been floated to basically rebalance the entire system. So let's break down exactly how it would work. The plan really has three main parts. First, you'd gradually reduce the benefits for the top tier earners. Second, and this is a really big deal, you'd limit or maybe even get rid of their annual cost of living adjustment, what we call the COLA. And finally, you'd take all the money you save from those two changes and you'd redirect it, reallocate it, to boost the benefits for lower income folks.
And that COLA is so important to this whole plan. The cost of living adjustment is that yearly raise that beneficiaries get to make sure their checks can keep up with inflation. You know, if the price of gas and groceries goes up, the COLA is supposed to make sure your benefits buying power doesn't go down. So limiting access to this is a really powerful tool because it means that over time, the real value of those higher-end benefits would actually shrink.
So what's the ultimate goal of this whole rebalancing act? What's the end game? Well, we are not talking about a small adjustment here. This is a long-term vision with a very specific and honestly pretty radical final goal. It's a vision that would play out over decades and would have some profound